I started working on Rose Farm around 4 years ago. My brother turned me onto an opening, and my Aunt Lily and I were hired on the spot, given our different backgrounds in horticulture. It was harder work than I'd anticipated, as we not only had to tend the roses in the greenhouse, but also had to deal with the monster plants out in the huge garden. There was no air conditioning, and when temperatures climbed in the summer months, we found shade whenever possible. There were plenty of trees and storage buildings, and some of the climbing roses had grown so dense that during breaks we would just sometimes chill along the pathway they'd grown over. We set our hours, and our boss, a terrible dragon of a woman, was blessedly rarely there to breathe down our necks. My brother was fired after being accused of breaking into our house, but my aunt and I stayed on until family obligations kept her home more often than not. There was a revolving doors of workers who came and went, usually due to how unpleasant our boss was, but the one constant was Tommy. Tommy was an older man who was nice enough, if not a bit off. He had worked there for 9 years at that point. Towards the end of the first year, he and I were the only ones working the farm, and he seemed pretty harmless, if not a bit off-putting. Our conversations during our breaks were innocent and innocuous enough. I learned that he had moved from West Virginia some years earlier, with his elderly mother, but he never told me why his family up there never talked to him, and I never asked. I'm a private person, and I figured it wasn't my business. But as time went by, things began steering straight into Creepy Town. Tommy would ask about my boyfriend, ask weird shit like if we ever kissed, if we shared a bed together, if we were getting married. Each time I had told him that I didn't think those were appropriate things to ask a coworker, and it seemed like that was that. Now, Tommy had always had a bit of a staring problem. I thought it was due to bad socialization, but it was really fucking weird. The staring became worse somehow when he started working on the opposite side of the property. Sometimes I would catch him crouched beneath a large bush or beneath a tree, just watching me work. If I saw him beneath a shade tree or beneath the climbers, I would go and sit in my car and have my break there. Tommy was also incredibly quiet when he moved. Sometimes I would stand up to find him right behind me. I have horribly bad anxiety, and this did not bode well. It got so bad that I told him straight up to stop or I would clock him. I asked the boss dragon about him one day during one of her upswings, but she confided in me that while he'd been working there for years, she didn't know very much about him. She assured me, however, that he wouldn't harm a fly. The boss dragon had a penchant for lying her ass off. That first summer turned to fall, and when winter hit, the job ended. I started back the next year, happy to be working outside. I'd almost completely forgotten about Tommy, but there he was, working away. I spoke to him as little as possible, and when we had a new hire, I always made sure to stick around them, even if their stay was only temporary. During Lily's sporadic work days, I would stay glued to her hip, but there were still days, too many, where I was alone with Tommy. One day, while weeding around the rosebush, I stepped into a nest of yellow jackets. I went straight to the boss dragon's house where her now ex-husband, Steve, a dearly sweet man who I now consider one of my best friends, gave me Benadryl, watched me to make sure I wasn't allergic with an EpiPen in hand, and offered me a place to sleep it off in their guest room. When I decided to go home, Boss Dragon had Tommy follow me in the work truck in case something happened. I wish I had put my foot down and said no, but if you've ever angered a bunch of yellow jackets, you know how much their stings hurt. I wanted to get home before the Benadryl kicked in and made me go to sleep. I didn't realize that gave Tommy the perfect opportunity to know where I lived. How he learned about where my aunt lived, however, is still a mystery. Now, I visited Lily a lot since she lived maybe 5 minutes from me. Next to her was a public park where people were always coming and going. one day I get a call saying that Tommy had been standing on the path that led into the park, and when she asked him what he was doing, he told her that he knew I visited often and he had hoped to see me. My aunt is a bit of a badass and told him to stop being creepy and to go away. It was public property, however, and Tommy could do whatever he wanted. What made it extra creepy is that Tommy didn't drive, so he had ridden his bike from his trailer near the Rose Farm, nearly 20 miles to the park next to Lily's house. I told the boss dragon and she shrugged it off, but she revealed to me that he often rode into my town and had even been in my subdevelopment because he told her that one day I wasn't at home. He said I was either at my home or my aunt's. It slowly dawned on me what was happening. He was stalking me. The boss dragon said she would handle it. She even gave me a hug. She didn't do anything though, and I will never forgive her for that. Very little scares me. I'm a tomboy who grew up in the country. Tommy, though smallish and in his 50s, scared me. I would see him in town or at the intersection by my housing development, just standing and staring, as if he were waiting. I quit my job soon after and thought that was that. I grew really paranoid. I would sit on my front stoop with a baseball bat for hours on end, just waiting for him to come up, but he never did. He did most of his stalking when he knew I wouldn't see him. He was sneaky. That scared me the most. Soon after I quit, one of my wheels came loose from my car, and I'm lucky that I work excellent in a crisis, because if I had not pulled over, the tire would have liberated itself from my back bumper where it was stuck, and I don't even want to know what would have happened. He continued stalking the park, continued stalking my neighborhood. I gave my neighbors a heads up. Lily grew increasingly tired of coming out in her yard only to see him standing in the park's path, staring with a cigarette perched between his lips, waiting. Driving past the Rose Farm one day, she saw Tommy standing by the old farm truck. Lily stopped, threw her car into reverse, and swerved into the parking lot. She got out of the car and started asking him questions, which he would not answer. She became so mad, my little spitfire of an aunt, that she kicked the side of the truck hard enough to dent it, to keep from kicking him. That was enough to get him to answer her next question. She asked him if he really believed that he and I were in a relationship. He said yes. I'd never done anything to lead this man on. Against her better judgment, she threatened him. But honestly, I love her for that. It brought me a few weeks of peace. I returned to the Rose Farm with my aunt and boyfriend to get our things eventually, coolers and tools that we used, because the boss dragon was too cheap to buy the tools required for the job. Tommy was walking along the road, staring, and when my aunt told him to keep walking, he crossed the street and just crouched down in the trees. He just kept staring and smoking his cigarette. Lily called the cops. The officer came, a really nice young man, and his presence sent Tommy running off through the woods. I told him what was up, and he told me that if Tommy tried anything, to get a restraining order. Then he went to speak with Tommy at his trailer. After that, phone calls began. I don't know how he got my number. At first, I would tell him to fuck off, and he would say creepy shit like how he would never hurt me. So I started to ignore him. He'd text me things about how much he loved me, grew irate when I didn't answer. He even told me to erase the text from my phone. He wouldn't stop, and ignoring him just seemed to push him further. He kept it up until I blocked him, but he continued his daily rides into town and to the park by my aunt's house. We're also pretty sure that he loosened the lug nuts on my car. So was the cop we talked to, and the judge, but without evidence, there was nothing we could do. That was the last straw for my boyfriend, Tim. Tim, a very sweet and level-headed man, confronted him next. The car had barely stopped when he jumped out of it, and asked him what his deal was. Again, Tommy was asked if he thought I was his girlfriend. Again, he said yes, even after I had made it extremely clear that I wasn't. That was the confrontation that caused Tommy to drop his simpering idiot act. It's hard to describe. I was sitting in the car with my aunt, and it was like the man had shark eyes. I went to the courthouse as soon as I could, and I was terrified that they wouldn't believe me, despite the texts and witness testimony. I filled out the appropriate forms and then went to speak in front of the judge. I watched other people go up, give their stories, and quite a few were sent home empty-handed. The judge was cold as ice, and I was so terrified. I pride myself on keeping my composure, but when I was up there and began speaking, I just burst into tears. I didn't feel safe in my own home. I didn't feel safe in my own town. He was so quiet when he moved, you see, that I never heard him sneaking up behind me. My sleep was plagued with nightmares where he bashed my brains in with a brick paver from the garden. To my surprise, the judge's demeanor changed. He issued an emergency restraining order then and there and told me to come back the next week for a more permanent one. He didn't even ask to see the texts. Tommy never even showed up to defend himself. He wasn't allowed anywhere near me, and the cops checked up on me from time to time, which was extremely nice and comforting. I grew comfortable again, but it took a long time. Summer came again, and the boss dragon called to ask if I would work. The thing was, she wouldn't fire Tommy. When she eventually fired him, I still said no thanks, told her to eat a bag of dicks, and later learned that he had pulled the same shit on an employee years before, and she had done nothing. When the boss dragon eventually abandoned him, my aunt, boyfriend, and I grew close to her ex-husband. He told us that his wife had never even told him about what was going on, since the Rose Farm was her baby, and he was a doctor with insane hours. Steve had no real way of knowing. We didn't talk to him, rarely saw him when we worked there. He was absolutely mortified and apologetic. With Tommy gone, we worked for the ex-husband for a year to help him close down the Rose Farm. I also found out that Tommy had gotten into a bit of trouble in West Virginia for sexual assault, and that was why he moved down here. So here's to you, Tommy, you fucking creep. Let us never meet again. I'm a female, and I was 28 years old at the time. I was working as an equine veterinary technician in New Jersey. The practice I worked for was ambulatory, meaning that we drove farm to farm treating horses. I traveled with a young male veterinarian every day. His name was Dave. I always drove, and he sat shotgun typing medical records. This was a couple of years ago, so the details are a tad fuzzy. We had an appointment scheduled to go out to a farm we'd never been to before. I was familiar with the area, since I'd grown up not too far from there, and since I drove all these back roads for my job, I'd been down the road of the address many times before. We typed the address into the GPS anyway, just to make sure we got to the right place and wouldn't be late. We're driving along the road and pass a small horse farm on the right, one we'd been to before. The address was a different number, so we kept driving. Across the street, there was a driveway which had a no trespassing sign. The address we were going to was the driveway directly after that. We pulled in and saw a house, but it was clear there were no horses there, so we started to question if the receptionist had taken down the wrong address when making the appointment. The driveway continued on past the house, so we followed it. We passed a couple of sheds, then the driveway went between a few trees and came to another house, which also didn't appear to have any horses, then turned left back toward the road. Now I'm figuring we're not in the right place, and Dave agrees. We are stopped there in front of the last house trying to figure out what to do, when suddenly, two men get out of a truck sitting in the driveway. Dave, a naive Midwesterner who sometimes is a bit too trusting, decides to roll down the window and ask for directions. The men start towards us, seeming to size themselves up to appear larger, and start circling the truck. Now I'm getting nervous. One man goes to stand behind the truck. I quickly lock the doors as the other man approaches Dave's window. Dave greets him, explains that we're lost, and asks if he can give us directions to the address we're looking for. The man just keeps staring at him with a pissed off look on his face. Thinking maybe he didn't hear him, Dave repeats himself. Before he can finish, the man interrupts him and says, "I heard you the first time. What the fuck are you doing here?" Now I'm shitting myself. This guy's a lot bigger than Dave, and I'm only 5'4" and about 120 pounds. So obviously I'm no match for this guy and his buddy who's still pacing back and forth behind our truck. Dave starts stammering that we're veterinarians and we're looking for our appointment. The man says we look too young to be veterinarians and says he doesn't believe us, that he wants proof. Dave gives him a business card, but he's still not convinced. He then shows the man our computer with all of our scheduled appointments. The man, still not looking entirely convinced, then tells us that we are lucky that we drove up while he was outside because he usually pulls a gun on trespassers, still giving us that angry, pissed off expression. Suddenly, my phone starts ringing. It's another one of our clients calling because her horse is colicking. I'm relieved to be talking to someone else, but I try to keep it cool, and admittedly, I was so distracted by this man and his friend, who was still behind the truck. The man is eyeing me, so not wanting to make the situation worse, I tell her we will call her back as the colic seems mild, and she has it under control for the time being. While I was busy on the phone, Dave told the man the name of the client whose address we were looking for, and that seemed to change his mood. He told us that our horse farm was the farm across the street, and then told us about his donkey that he used to have, and the vet that he used to use. He then proceeded to tell us again that he regularly pulls his gun on anyone that finds their way onto his property, and again reiterates how lucky we were to catch him outside. He also makes sure to tell us that he's a retired recon Marine and would have no problem killing someone. He gives us permission to follow his driveway back out onto the road. As we head out, I'm feeling happy to be alive. As we pull out of the drive, I realize it was the driveway with all the no trespassing signs. We finally make it to the appointment and tell the client about our adventure, trying to find her address. She tells us, "Oh yeah, that's Rocky Rick. He's a bit rough around the edges. Usually pulls a gun on people. I try not to mess with him." My family lives on a farm, so we have a large amount of land. We're straight off a state road with a horseshoe-shaped driveway. We had a dump trailer that sits in our yard just because we don't have anywhere else to put it. Due to this whole self-quarantine thing, I'm home with my younger brother. I hear honking outside, and out the window, I can just see a white vehicle. I'm sitting there, and the vehicle is just honking, as if they were waiting for someone to come out. This made me very uncomfortable. The fact someone decided to sit there and honk. I didn't even want to go and look for fears of possibly being seen. But of course, younger siblings being as they are, was quite oblivious to how creepy this actually was, and decided to walk up to the door in plain sight of the strangers in the vehicle. Me, not feeling safe with just sitting there and letting my brother talk to strangers who was sitting in the driveway, finally got up to talk to them. I was very uncomfortable with it all, not in a way that was, "I don't want to get sick." More of a, "there is a stranger who's honking at my door" kind of way. In hindsight, you could say this might have been about the whole virus in some regards, but other factors do come into play. There were two men in this white truck. The one who spoke to me was in the passenger seat. The driver seemed quite nervous. Every time I refused to give any information, he ended up starting the vehicle. His friend had to keep insisting to keep talking, which led to a cycle of turning his truck on and off again. The first thing I take note of is that this guy has a very heavy accent, which I still can't pin. The best guesstimation I have is something European. He's asking about the dump trailer in my yard, if it's for sale, which I say no, it's not. He asked if someone else is home that he could talk to. I didn't hear who exactly he wanted, since his friend turned the engine on again. My best guess is either a husband or my father, as he kept saying, "Tell him, have him call." Well, I'm not married, and my father was at work, so I said no. If he really wanted to see someone, he'd have to come back at a later time. Then he insisted on giving his number, still refusing to leave the vehicle while I was saying no. There's no point in getting his number. The trailer isn't for sale, and anyone else in my household would echo the same thing. But he insists I get a piece of paper or something to write his number down. He has me come close to write down this number, where I notice the next thing. His number. His area code was a Massachusetts number. We were in Pennsylvania. Now, he has me get close, right up to the window, which completely throws the whole distance thing out. They just didn't want to get out of the vehicle, which is what really made me uncomfortable. I was too afraid to go back into my house. I really didn't want to irritate these people and turn my back by refusing. So, I just followed what they asked, to get them the hell out of my driveway ASAP. I told my parents all of this once they'd gotten home. I gave them the number, which they didn't call because it seemed too suspicious. My dad decided to pull a gun out for me to keep nearby, just in case someone broke in because of this encounter. As my father said when I told him why they said they stopped, if that trailer was for sale, there would be a for sale sign. So I was living with my grandparents at the time, and they lived in a far-out residential area of a town at the end of a road that leads into farming areas. They were in a townhouse complex, and fortunately right at the front, which meant it was a 1-minute walk out of the complex to the bus stop right across the street. My stop was the very last stop on the route. One day I was waiting at the bus stop that's right near the trendy downtown area of my city, but a little out of the way. It's a relatively small city and doesn't have the greatest bus system. There were only 2 buses that stopped at this particular stop, the one to my place and the one into the next town over. The stop is also right next to the restaurant where my then fiancé, now husband, worked as a manager. I was sitting there texting my fiancé as he was just starting to close up, and a kind of sketchy, dirty-looking guy comes up and sits down on the bench. There was plenty of room, so it was no big deal. After a moment, he starts to make conversation. This was around 2 years ago, so I don't remember exactly what he was saying, but I asked if he was taking the bus into a nearby city, and he says yes, he lived there. The whole time he was there, he was almost comically manspreading, with one leg up on the bench, proudly displaying his crotch. I ignored this and politely responded to him when necessary, while texting my boyfriend. My bus arrives. The creep gets on. This is not the bus to the nearby town. I'm a little weirded out at this point, and I mention it to my fiancé in texts. I was sitting at the back of the bus, and the man was sitting at the very front, but turned all the way around so he was facing me, staring at me. Oh hell no. The bus goes through some residential areas, and then makes a brief stop at a small strip mall, and then it's just houses from there until the end. I'm texting my fiancé, getting more and more creeped out as he does nothing but look at me when I'm not watching. We hit the strip mall, and he doesn't get off. Now I'm legitimately freaked out. There's nowhere else for him to go. I text my fiancé and tell him this. He immediately calls me, tells me to act normal, and that he's coming to meet me at my bus stop. He said not to get off anywhere else. Do not interact. I somewhat loudly respond, "Okay, yeah, I'll see you there, babe." The creepy guy immediately turns around and faces the front. I spend the next 5 minutes anxiously thinking what I'll do if he isn't there when I get to my stop. I can't just go into my house if he gets off the bus. He'll know where I live. We come around the corner to the very last stop, and this guy still hasn't gotten off. He's very intentionally facing as far away from me as possible now. I get off the bus just as my fiancée pulls up, and this guy does not. This is the last stop. The bus is now going on the reverse route. This guy was following me. My fiancée ended up walking me to my door, checking the house and making me lock everything until my grandparents got home. I was pretty shaken, to be honest. He went back to work to finish closing up, but came back again later. All in all, I'm lucky to have a husband who took me so seriously. I'm not sure what would have happened had I not gotten the call from him that he was coming. So I moved into a new house 18 months ago. My special needs cousin and my brother live with me. 3 weeks ago, my brother woke up in the middle of the night and decided to sit outside and have a cigarette. He said he heard the front gate open and looked up, and the landlord's boyfriend was sneaking into the yard. My brother yelled at him and he tried to act like he wasn't there. My brother got up and the guy ran back to his house. If this wasn't strange enough, he's been caught 4 times this week, putting his hand through the window and moving the blind so he can watch us. I caught him personally a few nights ago, standing on a box to peek into my bedroom. I put dead leaves under our window so we can hear him, and it worked. We caught him sneaking behind our house at 1 a.m. The next morning at 7 a.m., I got a call from the landlord telling me to remove the leaves. They can't see them from their house. You have to be behind my house to see them at all. It is kind of scary, and I've been sleeping with my gun and my dog. I feel like if I do anything about this, I will end up on the streets. It's almost impossible to find another rental where I live. I don't know what to do. This is before the pandemic. I was walking to the train station after a long day at work. I was really tired and dragging my feet. There's a younger couple in front of me. The guy's holding this girl's upper arm, like how a cop would drag or escort a perp kind of handhold. He was using some force because the girl's shoulder was lifted on the side he was holding. I didn't know what to do, but we were going to the same station, so I tried to get closer, but they were fast. I was tired, so I couldn't catch up to hear what they were saying. The weird thing is, the girl has a small but nice bouquet of flowers in her purse she was holding with her other arm. So, kinky was my first thought. Then the guy removed his hands. I was relieved, but he moved his hands to the girl's nape and started to push her. She starts tumbling forward, and then this guy used his other arm to twist the girl's arm behind her back, while still holding onto the back of her neck. This was just horrible. They started to draw people's attention now, and before I could catch up, they made a sharp turn and took a near exit. I had to go home. I really don't know what I could have done had I caught up to them. This happened when I was 11. My brothers and I had not long started at a new school. 3 days a week Mom would drop us off. The other 2 we caught the bus. This day Mom dropped us off. As soon as she pulled up, I spotted a man standing at the only gate in the school. Apparently no one thought that was creepy. I begged Mom to drop us off out the back, but she was late for work and wouldn't listen. I waited for Mom to drive off and told my brothers to do exactly as I say without question. They nodded and we walked towards the gate. I placed myself between the man and my brothers, making sure I got a good look at him. He was about 6 foot, dark brown hair, tattoo sleeve down his right arm, wearing a black skin-tight t-shirt and camo shorts. As we walked past him, I noticed something that made my heart skip a beat. In his hands, close to the school gate, was a pocket knife he was flicking in and out. At that point, priority 1 was to get my brothers somewhere safe. I made them walk quickly in front of me to the library. I told them not to leave the library until I came back to get them. I then made my way to the office through the staff room. My teacher, Miss Muddle, stopped me and tried to make me go back to the front of the school to the office. I looked at her and said, "There is a man in front of the school with a knife." She could see I was serious and let me through. The office lady called the cops, who were quick to show up and arrest the guy. Lunchtime that same day, I was called to the principal's office. Before I could ask what I had done this time, I was pulled into a hug by some random lady who couldn't stop thanking me for saving her son's life. It turns out the guy was the father of one of the students who had been physically abusing the kid and his mother. When she decided to leave him and stop him from seeing his son, he decided he would kidnap and kill the boy, because as he saw it, if he couldn't have him, no one would. Years ago, I was walking my dog with my sister at a farm right by my house. The farm owner, a nice lady who still runs it today, lets the public use the farm and woods for free to walk their dogs, as long as dogs stay on their leads when by the farm animal pens and fields. The farm is quite big, and if you walk further in, there's a little woods at the back of it, which are normally deserted. We always feel safe walking here though, because we've both known the farm owner since we were babies, and the walls surrounding the farm are massive and couldn't be easily climbed over, if that makes sense. Anyway, we go into the farm and make our way to the woods, because we can let the dog off his lead there. We let him off the lead and start walking around. The woods go in a big circle around the farm, so we usually just do a little lap of the woods before coming back into the farm and then going home. We're walking along, chatting, and then sitting ahead of us on a fallen down tree log was a man. He was just sitting there. What I mean is, he wasn't drinking a coffee he bought from the little farm shop at the farm. He didn't have a dog with him. He was just sitting on the log, staring straight ahead at the trees in the woods. We carry on walking, and as we come close to him, he suddenly looks over at us quite quickly and says, "The only way out of this path is over there," in this monotone voice, and points at the woods. We just ignored him and carried on walking. We told the lady who owns the farm that there was a man in the woods, and she said she hadn't seen anyone go in there before us, but asked us nevertheless what he was doing. We said he wasn't doing anything, just sitting there, but we did tell her what he had said to us. She looked confused and went into the woods with us and asked us to show her where the man had been. We showed her where he had pointed to, and she said, "That leads to the wall that's used to separate the farm from the railway tracks." Apparently years before, there was a railway next to the farm that stopped being in use for whatever reason 30-some years before, and now just sits there overgrown and desolate. I don't know what the man meant by that being the only way out of the woods, but the whole thing made me feel unnerved. We never saw him again, and neither did the farm owner. My boyfriend and I live in a small one-bedroom apartment in a fairly medium-sized city. There isn't much crime that I hear of, but the apartment complex we live in is a little sketchy. Anyway, I had been home from work for about an hour, and my boyfriend had just gotten home from band practice. He's usually good about locking the door when he comes in, and I know I'm religious about it. I usually lock the handle and deadbolt when I come in. We were heading to the bedroom to lay down and watch a movie when we hear the handle jiggle to our apartment door. Now, we have a cat named Hamilton and a puppy named Midge. She's around 5 months and really playful. Midge started growling and Hamilton arched his back, his tail puffed out, when some random guy walks into our apartment. I really didn't see what happened. I heard everything from my boyfriend later because I was cowered in the corner of our bedroom while he was standing in the doorway to confront the random guy who walked in. "Who are you looking for?" is all my boyfriend asks, and I'm positive that we're both going to die soon. Meanwhile, I can hear the cat and dog freaking out. This guy just stutters and says, "I'm sorry, bro," and my boyfriend has to walk toward him to get him to leave. But he finally does, and my boyfriend locks the door behind him. He comes back into the bedroom and tells me the guy was carrying a freshly grilled steak on a plate, and that he didn't seem to want to leave. I'm not sure if he was high or just accidentally walked into the wrong apartment, but it was nerve-wracking to say the least. My boyfriend locks the door whenever he comes back home now. I was at a train station in Seattle. I love watching people interact with strangers in public, so I was looking around at all the people around me. There were probably about 30 people waiting for the train on this day not long ago. I happened to notice a young woman staring at something far off from her, just perfectly still and staring. She began to look scared after a few seconds. I glanced in the direction she was looking and saw this middle-aged man seemingly looking back at her. And as I saw him, he started walking towards the woman. I looked back, and now this woman looked terrified and started trying to fight the crowd to leave. I looked back at the man who was staring her down and making his way towards her. Looking back at the woman, I saw her break out of the crowd and look back at the man. She started walking away fast. I was at the edge of the crowd waiting for the train, so I walked towards where the man would emerge from and cut him off. I said, "Excuse me, sir, I'd like to ask you some questions." He pushed past me, so to stop him, I grabbed his arm. I said, "Sir, that was really rude of you to ignore me like that." He yelled at me to let him go, so I looked for the woman again, but she was gone, so I let go of him. After that, he obviously had lost track of the woman. He turned back to yell at me again before storming off. I called the police and got them to stop the guy for questioning, but all they could do was slow him down and allow the woman to get a better head start in her escape. I'm not telling this to get praise from anyone. This guy was seriously looking to harm that woman. I still have no clue what he had really planned on, and I only hope that woman is safe. I know it's a long shot, but if you are that woman, just know I only did what I thought was good and right. Know that I knew what I was doing when I distracted that guy. It was my pleasure. Be well. My father died in 2009 after a heart attack, ironically whilst helping build a table in a church. I had recently turned 18 when it happened, and was thrust into the unpleasant process of funeral arrangements. With help from my family, we were able to set up a funeral at that very same church, because life is quite ironic. At that funeral, I was with my family, greeting people at the door and showing them in. I was sullen, broken, and angry with the world at large. As I shook each person's hand and offered them some token thanks for coming, I knew all the faces that came by, if some only distantly, until this woman came through the line with a large wrapped package in her arms. Funerals, at the least as I know them, aren't usually the time for gifts, so she immediately caught my attention. She was about 5'6" with long, black, curly hair, and seemed to be in her late 50s, which would fit her knowing my father. She came up and shook my hand, rather enthusiastically considering the setting, and said, "Hi, I'm Monica. I knew your dad very well, and he would want you to have this," as she pushed the package into my arms. I immediately felt it as I knew it was a book, a big one. Not big as in thick, but long and wide in the cover, about 2 foot by 1 foot respectively. This being not the time for it, I set it aside and continued the funeral, but not before she gave me a big out-of-nowhere hug. I assume that Monica attended the funeral and left afterwards, but I never saw her leave. In fact, me, nor any of my family, had ever even heard of her. I asked the people who helped me put it all together, and they had no idea who she was. No call logs, no social media messages, nothing. In fact, we kept my father's death specifically off of social media, because even at the time, I saw Facebook for being the incredibly terrible place that it's proven to be. Nobody had heard of her, to the point I thought she might be crashing random people's funerals. But she knew my father. I know this because inside the book she gave me is a handwritten inscription that's a bit too personal for me to share verbatim, but it was definitely referring to my father by name. Lastly, that inscription was written as though it was a gift being given to my father and was dated at the end with the date of his birthday in 1984, 25 years before the funeral. The funeral got done and sucked, as funerals do, and we started the process of going through all my dad's stuff. I eventually looked at the big book we got, and it was called The Secret Teaching of All Ages, an encyclopedic outline of Masonic, Hermetic, Kabbalistic, and Rosicrucian symbolical philosophy by Manly P. Hall. As I started to look through it, what first caught my attention was how expensive the book looked and felt. Thick parchment, well-made spine and cover, and meticulously written from what I could understand at the time. I only made it through 2 pages before my head just felt numb. The book is big, but the font inside is pretty small comparatively. Then there were the illustrations, massive, full-page pictures depicting some of the weirdest symbology I've ever seen. Pictures of gods, rituals, expansive tables on elements, and different worlds. There's a picture just about every 3rd page, each more strange than the last. All the pictures looked old. I'm not an art guy, but this looks like the way old paintings were done. All the illustrations were printed into the book, not drawn there originally. I've read a small bit more now that I'm older and can understand the writing a bit better. It seems to be written in a way that describes the philosophy and rituals of each of the named groups, as well as the history of those rituals and the connecting line throughout. It does not take a stance on the validity of the information. Additionally, the edition I have is the Golden Anniversary Edition, and I have found that the original edition was published in 1925. This happened when I was 15 or 16 years old, around 2004-ish. I was currently in high school. I had a very long commute into the city and back to my house every day to get to and from my school. The last part of my commute was a 5-minute bus ride that dropped me off around the corner from my house. I have pretty bad social anxiety, and I was a cute young girl. I had constant interactions with strangers on public transportation. They ranged from grown men barking like a dog at me while calling me a princess, to 30-year-old men writing their numbers down on pieces of paper and throwing it at me and running away. The worst experience by far was the day I was sitting at the very front end of the bus, and a teen boy sat next to me. I usually sat in the very front of the bus to avoid people, and because of the fact I was only on the bus for 5 minutes. This teen kid had bleach blonde hair and a wannabe Eminem kind of thing going on. He got onto the bus and sat next to me. I had a really bad feeling in my stomach. He kept trying to get my attention while I was facing forward with stuff like, "Hey, yo girl, yo." It was over and over again. I finally turned around to ask what he wanted because he kept touching my arm. I was very uncomfortable. As I turned around, he elbowed me in the side of my face hard. I was stunned. It hurt pretty badly. He started laughing at my reaction and smiling very widely. I got up and went to the bus driver. It was an older guy. I was crying and pleading with him to kick the kid off the bus because he'd hit me in the face. The bus driver didn't even look at me or say anything at all. When I got off the bus at my stop, the kid also got off. He followed me off the bus and around to my house. He just kept laughing and smiling and taunting me right as I walked into the front door. I didn't have a cell phone or anything at the time. When I got inside, he walked away. I locked the doors and started icing my face. I figured I'd wait till my dad got home to tell him. I remember my father being absolutely furious. He called and got the bus driver fired for ignoring me and not taking action. My parents got me pepper spray and a cell phone right after that. They were always afraid of me traveling after that incident. It was an awful experience. I'm a woman, and I was states away from home on a business trip. One night at around 8:30 p.m., I'd just gotten back to my room from a work dinner. I heard shuffling in the hallway and peeked out the peephole. I saw a figure seemingly outside the room to the left of mine. They were knocking lightly and said twice quickly, "Hello? Hello?" Then it sounded like the door opened and closed. I was like, okay. They must have forgotten what room they were in or something, and someone let them in. I walk back to the main part of my room, and I hear shuffling again. I look out again and see a figure. I can't really make out what the person looks like, but I see them on the other side of my room this time. And again, I hear light knocking and them say, "Hello, hello?" I started to get a weird spidey sense. What the hell was going on? I see the figure leave and think, okay, that was weird. Then I again start hearing shuffling. I start walking toward the hotel room door, and I hear a light knock on what sounds to be my door. Again I hear, "Hello, hello?" And immediately after, someone attempts to open my door. Thank God I had the cross latch pulled over. My heart stopped as I stood there and watched the door hit the latch and fall back shut. I called the front desk and informed them that someone just tried to enter my room and I'm not staying with anyone else. The front desk attendant just replied, "I don't have any housekeeping up there." To which I replied, "Okay, well, that's concerning. Can you please send someone up to check around?" The attendant replied, "Well, there's no manager on duty." I then asked if I should call the police instead, because I was very worried as I started to cry a bit. She replied that I should do what I thought I needed to do. I hung up and cried for a bit, not sure what to do. I didn't want to ask for another room because I was too scared to leave. 10 minutes later, the hotel phone starts ringing. I was honestly feeling really scared to answer, but I did. It was the front desk attendant, and she said the police were coming to my room. She told me she didn't want me to panic when I heard someone knock on my door. I said okay and hung up. I sat there and thought, how do I know this is legit? Whoever tried to access my room had a key, otherwise how else would the door have actually opened? A few minutes later, as expected, I hear a knock. I looked out the peephole and saw 2 male officers. I didn't ask to see ID, which in hindsight would have probably been the smart thing to do, but I was so shaken up and not really thinking. I opened the door and they asked what was going on. I told them everything. They said it was good I had the cross latch pulled over because the door would have opened if I hadn't. I responded, "It's a hotel. What do you mean? What's the point of the access card then?" And I wiggled the handle. They then took a pause and they said, "Oh, it automatically locks. Again, I say yeah, it's a hotel. So then they had me shut the door and open it with the key to test it. Sure enough, it did not open without the access card. They said it was probably housekeeping. I responded that the front desk attendant told me there was no housekeeping up when I called. Plus, it was 8:30 p.m. Why would housekeeping be coming at that time unless I had requested someone to come by? Plus, I noticed housekeeping had already been during the day because my trash can was emptied and my dirty towel was gone. They ultimately told me they thought it was housekeeping and not to be worried, but if anything else happened or I felt unsafe, to call them. They also said if I wanted to change rooms, they were sure the hotel would accommodate this. I said okay while crying, and then they left. After that, I got home safe. I'm glad I followed my gut and reacted the way I did, and did what I could do to stay safe. I was able to speak with the manager the next day when she came in at 11 a.m. Unfortunately, the response from her was disappointing, just like the night shift front desk clerk and also the morning shift front desk clerks when I checked out. Needless to say, I will never stay in this hotel again, and I will be avoiding this large chain as a whole. Well, this one time I was at work in the mall after my shift ended. I walked down the hallway to go outside to my car. In the hallway, there was a small girl and a big creepy janitor who worked at that mall. She was trapped with him between her and the door. Now I, not being much bigger than her, was freaked the hell out, and my coworker was still at the store. But I buckled down, realizing this girl needed me as much as I needed her. I remembered something I saw on the internet, put my head up, relaxed my shoulders, thought murder, and walked over there. I grabbed her by the arm, shoved the very surprised janitor out of the way, and walked her to the door. She clung onto my arm for dear life, and the janitor tried to follow, asking in rough English what the fuck was wrong with me. I ushered her outside the door, spun around, and said with every bit of venom I could muster, "If you fucking touch us, I will rip your fucking throat out." For some reason it worked. He backed the hell off. I walked her to her car and made sure she made it out of the lot safely. Nearly 2 years ago, my husband and I moved to a pretty safe town. We decided to have some fun while we're young and child-free, so we got an apartment downtown. It's really fun. It's on top of a shopping center with restaurants, boutiques, a theater, all kinds of stuff. We've had a blast living here and have always felt very safe. I like to go on walks. Since the area is so busy, I've always just walked here when I'm alone. I go on a walk about every other day, less in the winter. Anyway, for 2 years, I've seen this older man sitting in the shopping center. He always gave me a really bad feeling, so if I came upon him, I tried to divert my path. But I felt bad for judging. I said to myself, maybe I'm just paranoid. Maybe he's old and lonely and wants to be out around people. Well, the other night there was a shooting in the shopping center. It was around 8 at night, and I never go out that late by myself, so I didn't even know about it until the next morning. It turns out that same old man had kidnapped a woman in the shopping center at gunpoint, assaulted her, and tried to drive away with her. Her husband drove after them and shot at the guy. She was rescued, and he is in jail. He admitted to the police that he's been stalking that shopping center for victims, watching women around there. I cannot tell you how many times in the past 2 years I have crossed paths with this man, how many times I felt guilty for feeling uncomfortable around him, how many times I was right in his path. An easy target. Always trust your gut. Always. This was my first incident of ever being followed, harassed, stalked, or whatever you want to call it. I made it nearly 30 years on this earth. I suppose something like this had to happen sometime. It's probably relevant to this story, so I'll start off with the fact that I'm a female. I'm also a huge fan of this band called Ghost. Anyway, I have this one Ghost shirt that's a bootleg copy of an extremely rare shirt, and I honestly really love it. When I bought it, it wound up being way too small to wear, but since I dropped a bunch of weight recently, yay anxiety, I celebrated by putting it on and making a trip to the mall, mostly to pick up a new album I wanted. So I'm just browsing through the mall's music store, not particularly finding what I wanted, but just seeing if they had any other cool shit. When this guy I don't know sorta makes his way towards me and also starts to browse. I don't pay him any mind. I figured he was just a fellow metal fan, given his Gojira shirt. He was actually kind of good looking, so I didn't get the creep vibe at all. I'm flipping through the secondhand CDs when I hear this guy start to talk. "You like Ghost?" It sorta took me a second to realize he was talking to me. I space out a lot and honestly hate small talk. It makes me want to lay down in traffic. It caught me off guard and I almost pretended not to hear him, but he said it again. I guess I couldn't ignore him. And to be honest, a lot of random metalheads you meet turn out to be pretty cool. "Yeah," I said, trying to sound nothing more than polite, and also make sure he saw my wedding ring. "They're my favorite," I said. It sort of made me uncomfortable when he didn't smile and start saying something like, "Yeah man, I saw them back when," or some shit like that. He just looked at me like I just said, "Fuck your mother." Now the "this is weird" feeling starts to kick in. I just go back to pretending to be interested in CDs. He didn't take the hint because the next thing out of his mouth was, "That shirt is a bootleg." I looked back at him with a really bitchy expression, giving him the look that said leave me alone. All I said was, "Yeah, it is," and I decided to get the fuck out of Dodge before I had to listen to some pretentious metal elitist rant. The guy just kept staring at me with that shitty expression until I'm out of the store, and I think that's the end of it. I decided to check out Hot Topic to see if they had any Behemoth shirts, and by this point, I had totally forgotten about Shirtman. I'm just sort of picking through the shirts and feeling a bit pissed off at the lack of metal t-shirts and the excess of teeny bopper shit like Bieber or whatever. And then I turn around, and there's the fucking guy again. It sort of startled me to see him, and for a split second, I thought it was just a coincidence. Maybe he was trying to find his kid or whatever, but all that went to shit when he looks at me, looking pissed off this time, and says, "That fucking shirt is a bootleg. Do you know how disrespectful that is? I'm legitimately not the nicest person in the world if you push my buttons, so I match his pissy expression and tell him, "Look man, I don't give two shits if it's bootlegged or not. It's a badass shirt, and I'll wear whatever I want. Excuse me," and I shoved past him as rudely as possible. Told the cashier that I'd be back in an hour to pay for the shit that she'd had behind the counter, and I left. This time, I'm angry as fuck. I'm texting both my husband and my dad at this point about this bastard, so at least they knew where I was and what was going down. After I blew my stack, I felt better, and again I brushed the guy off. The last thing on my day at the mall agenda was to get my nails done, so I go to the salon. And as I'm getting my acrylics put on, I look outside the window, and holy shit, there's this man once again. He looked mad as hell. What is his problem? I thought to myself. The rational side of my brain kept trying to tell me that maybe he's having a shitty day, and that I was a convenient target, or whatever, and that maybe his girl's getting her nails done too. Another half hour or so goes by, and this fucker hasn't budged an inch. Shit, I don't even know if he blinked. I was really freaked out by now, and with the hand that wasn't getting manicured, I was frantically texting my husband, dad, and older brother, saying whichever one of you is closest to the mall, Get here, now. My dad lived like 5 minutes up the road from the mall, so he says, "Don't worry, baby, I'm on my way," which made me feel a lot better. I am so glad I decided to text my dad, because shit really got wild once I walked out of the nail place. No sooner do I set one fucking foot out of the salon, this creep comes rushing right up to me, red-faced and literally screaming, "Your shirt is bootlegged. It's bootlegged. You don't give a shit about Ghost. You disrespect them all." And he keeps going on and on and on, calling me every name in the book. I'm honestly pretty tough, but when you've got a guy who has a foot and at least 50 pounds on you, it's hard not to be scared. Shirt guy is towering over me, and by this point I'm crying. I can't believe no one had called mall security or the cops or whatever. I think they just assumed he was my asshole boyfriend or something. Not a great excuse, but that's all I could figure. My dad picked the perfect time to show up, because this guy was literally a second away from grabbing me or hitting me or something. And I gotta be honest, I was about ready to literally piss my pants. My dad is a really big guy, former Navy, built like a tank with a Desert Eagle on his hip. That's when I hear him yell, "You got a fucking problem, buddy," with his hand on that big-ass gun. I run like a scared little baby behind my dad, and this man actually tries to yell at my dad, but once he saw that gun, he scampered. My dad rode me in his truck over to my car, and then followed me back home just to make sure that asshole didn't follow me. He stayed with me until my husband got home. Thank God I'm daddy's girl. I'm a female, and when I was 17, my oldest sister, who was 23 at the time, took me to the mall to get me a cell phone. The guy who sold it to us, probably in his early 20s, showed us several options. Let me pick the phone, choose from a selection of numbers, pretty standard. He set us up with a plan and we left. Nothing seemed too out of the ordinary when I got a text saying, "Hey, it's the guy who sold you your new phone." I replied, "I'm not sure what though. I was young and naive, and this was 13 years ago." What I remember is that he kept texting me and calling me, kept telling me how attractive I was, and that we should be together. I told him it wasn't a good time for me. I was about to leave for the entire summer. He asked where I was going, and offered to come along. I didn't have any hard plans. I was gonna live out of my car. I definitely didn't want a stranger to ride along. Though it was odd that he would quit his job and leave the state on a whim for a girl he only spoke to in person for about maybe 15 minutes. I told him I thought this was creepy. I asked him to leave me alone, to stop calling and texting me. He kept calling. I kept not answering. We had to file a complaint and change my number. I work at an outdoor mall in a great neighborhood. You'd assume that it's safe as hell to be here, but then again, you just can't be sure anymore. There are creepy people everywhere, and I just can't help shake the feeling that this isn't my last encounter with this man. I'm 19 years old, and I work at a kiosk that sells all kinds of wonky jewelry. It's usually teens, young adults, and occasionally some older adults that shop with us. Every once in a while, this man comes up to the kiosk, easily recognizable. Same leather jacket, crinkled corner of his eyes, one front tooth shorter than the other, same slouched way of walking. He's usually harmless, but oh my God, the last few times he's come by, he's made me so uncomfortable. I greet every customer with, "Hey, can I help you find anything?" And most of them say they're just looking. He always smiles at me and says, "Just looking, darling." At first it was fine. I didn't care whatsoever. He seemed like a harmless 50 or so year old man. He always spent a very long time looking at the display and never bought anything. Most of the time I'm working the night shift at the kiosk while I'm surrounded by other shoppers and other kiosk workers. Mine is kind of all by itself in between two empty ones in the back. I'm usually left alone, minus the friendly security woman that stops and chats with me on her rounds. She comes by every 30 minutes or so, and she's one of the few friends I have at work. The only stores in my view are a Reebok and a Macy's. A few nights ago, I was sitting at my kiosk, bored out of my mind. The security lady had already continued on her way. I had scrolled through Reddit already, and I was getting ready to open up Netflix and continue watching Terrace House when I hear footsteps coming up. I look up to see the creepy man staring at me, but not actually at the kiosk yet. I wave at him, and he gives a little smile, but one that sends chills down my spine. The customer walks up, and I immediately jump at the chance to help them, trying to shake the creepy feeling I had. After I had checked out the customer and written down the receipt, I glanced up to see the man still staring at me. Before I could say anything, he started walking over, taking my eye contact as permission to come join me. "Evening, darling," he said, doing an almost bow. "Good evening," I told him. He proceeded to do as usual, checking the display, not buying anything. Instead of walking around the cart, he stayed by the register where I was, walking behind my chair to check the sides, but never went where he couldn't see me. Then he started asking questions, like we were longtime friends. "So, darling, do you have a boyfriend?" I kind of coughed at that because I've been single for over a year now. I told him no, I didn't have a boyfriend, but there was a checkout girl I found pretty damn cute at my local grocery store. "I see," he said. "Do you have any plans after work?" he asked me. I was getting uneasy at this point, but I told him yes. I was going to a party. "You gonna hook up with any boys?" he asked. My jaw dropped. Whether or not I was hooking up with any boys was in no way any business of his, but I just told him no. He smiled a little and said, "Good, you're too pretty for them little boys anyway." He faced me again and came up to hug me. Until this point, I hadn't realized my heart rate increasing, and it only became apparent after I found it harder to breathe. Before he could actually do so, Linda, the security woman, walked up and glared at him. "Sir, if you're not going to be buying anything from this young woman, I suggest you go loiter somewhere else." He stiffened at the sound of Linda's voice, and then he left. "You all right, honey?" she asked me. I shrugged. "He's always here," I told her. She shook her head. "Let me and Russ walk you to your car after work, okay?" I nodded, relieved that she offered without me having to ask. The rest of my shift is fine. I get through it and manage to make my bosses a bit of money. At 10 o'clock on the dot, Linda and her boyfriend Russ are at my kiosk. They wait for me to pack up my purse and then walk me to my little Prius. They wait for me to drive away as well. On my way to the party, I stop by a gas station to fill up the tank. As I'm waiting for it to fill, I glance over and see the man from the mall at the mini-mart. He's buying a pack of cigarettes and he looks out the window and sees me. When he does, he smiles and waves. He holds up one finger, asking me to wait a minute. I don't. I yank out the fuel hose and jump into my car, getting the fuck out of there as fast as possible. I take several detours before arriving 30 minutes late to the party. I had to make sure I would lose him before showing up there. It's been a few nights since that's happened, and the only reason I'm telling this story now is because I'm actually working the morning shift. I just saw him walk out of the Macy's across from me. Linda has someone biking around this half of the mall, so he will not come near me today. But please, keep me in your thoughts, guys. This story happened when my best friend and I were about 15 years old. We had to take an important exam at the end of the year, so we attended some private sessions in order to prepare. Because of this, we could hang out on Saturdays after 5 p.m. We were at the mall, and after a bit of window shopping, she asked me to come outside in the park so she could have a quick smoke. She took it from her mother, but I didn't smoke. I've never liked it. I accepted it as I was used to her doing it. So we were in the mall's park, walking while she was smoking that damn cigarette. It was like 6 p.m., but it was already dark outside as this happened in winter. Let me tell you about the place where we were. This was a large park, full of trees and big rectangular-shaped bushes. On the side aisle, there were some restaurants, a full 10-meter gap, an exit to a dark street and to the parking lot, another big space, and a place for skating. We thought that we were safe, as we were still walking on the mall's property. We arrived near that exit to the dark street, when a 5'9" man approaches us and asks for a cigarette. My friend tells him that she doesn't have any, that she got hers from someone else too. He was in his late 40s, unshaved and wearing a red hood. It almost covered his eyes. I tell him that we have to go, and he responds with some incoherent words. We both knew that something was off, so we made some steps back. "Why are you scared? I won't do anything to you," he said as he was approaching. "Don't worry, I've met a lot of girls like you," he said, then started to mumble other words I couldn't understand. We didn't know what to do. We didn't know if he had a weapon. Behind us was a big bush. In front of us was him. If we chose to run in different directions, he would be able to catch at least one of us and probably take that person with him. There weren't many people, but the ones who were passing by didn't seem to care about our terrified faces. My friend started to repeat that she was sorry, but she couldn't help him, and I think that one of the passerbys heard her. Fortunately, a 6'3" man who looked a lot younger and stronger than the creep stopped and asked him why he was bothering us, but he didn't give any response. My friend took the chance, crushed her cigarette with her foot as quickly as possible, and started to run. I, as a complete idiot, remained frozen for a few more seconds and looked in our savior's eyes. He then told me to leave, and I started to sprint. We didn't stop running until we were sure they couldn't see us anymore. Both of them left, and we got back into the mall safely. We never told anyone about this encounter. My mom was youngish when she had me, about 23. She looked even younger than she actually was. She'd taken me with her to the local mall on Black Friday and was getting some New York clothes. A couple went up to her at one point and told her how cute I was. She thanked them and walked away. A while later, she realized the couple had been following us store to store. She wasn't sure if it was a coincidence or not, so when she went to the food court, which was right next to the security desk, the couple came up to her again and told her that, while she was brave for being a teenage mother, she shouldn't waste her youth being saddled with a child, that they could do a better job raising me than she could. They told her they would give her $5,000 for me. My mother was furious. She was a single mother, yes, but by choice. She broke off her engagement to my biological father a few months after she found out she was pregnant. He really didn't want to deal with a child right after graduating from college. She had moved back to her hometown and had an apartment near her parents' house. My grandma watched me while my mom was at work. She had a very well-paying job at Ford as well. She told them she was not a teenage mother and that she would get a security officer if they didn't leave us alone. They got angry and tried to grab my stroller. My mother just took a deep breath and screamed as loudly as she could. It worked. 3 security officers came running from different directions. The couple ran for it, leaving me behind. My mom explained the situation to the officers, and 2 officers took after the couple. One officer walked my mom to her car to make sure nothing more happened. The next day, my mom got a call from the police letting her know the couple had been arrested. They tried to take someone else's baby as well. They were charged with multiple accounts of attempted kidnapping. It turns out that the wife was infertile, but the couple didn't want to deal with the work of adopting a child. They'd been following around young blonde women with babies in the hope that the baby would end up blonde as well, as the husband and wife were both blonde. I know they were sent to jail, but I'm sure they're both still there on multiple accounts of kidnapping. At least, I hope they are. How messed up do you have to be to try and pressure mothers into giving away their children? I'm 40 years old now, so this occurred about 26 years ago. I'd gone to the mall with my mother, and being the cool and independent little shit I was, I didn't want to walk around with my mom. I was about 13 to 14 years old, so my mom agreed to let me wander through the mall and then meet me at the department store in 1 hour. Usually I would go window shopping or go into Spencer's Gifts to look at all the dorky stuff that teenagers liked back in the day. When the hour came up, I walked to the agreed meeting spot. I waited for my mom to arrive. I must have been in there for not 3 minutes when an older man came up to me and attempted to strike up a conversation. My parents had always warned my brother and me about the whole stranger danger situation and whatnot. However, the man seemed harmless at the time. He started telling me that I was a beautiful young lady. He then tried to convince me to go with him to his car because he supposedly had a camera there, and all he wanted to do was take a quick picture of me to submit to an agency. This whole time, I began to feel like I was having an out-of-body experience. All I kept doing was giggling nervously and telling him no. He became more adamant about getting me to follow him, to the point that he started nudging my arm and pulling me so I could go outside and take this picture. Finally, as quickly as this bizarre event began, it ended. An older lady came up to us and asked him, "Do you know this girl?" The man became visibly uncomfortable, and the lady stood by my side and told him to fuck off. He quickly shuffled away, and she looked me square in the eyes and asked me if I was okay. In hindsight, I really don't think I knew what could have happened had I followed this creepster to his vehicle. All I did was tell the lady that I was fine as I walked away to finally find my mother. Looking back, I am so grateful to that lady. I'm not one to act like a drama queen, or even a person who overreacts to certain situations. However, I believe that this woman may have saved my life. I will never, in my life, forget her or that experience. I was sitting at the mall eating lunch, waiting for my boyfriend at the time to show up. I was totally alone, which was normal, so I wasn't really fazed. What wasn't normal was when I looked up and saw a group of 5 or 6 guys approaching me, sitting down with me at my table, and the tables next to me at all angles without asking. They were constantly looking around, acting really sketchy. They were badgering me to talk to them, so I felt really awkward. They kept trying to talk to me and were giving me really creepy compliments, asking for my number, the usual. So of course, despite having my phone directly in my hands, I said, "Sorry, I don't have a phone," hoping they would get the hint. They told me they were in their early 20s and late teens. They then asked how old I was. I said I was 16. They said, "That's okay with me." And naturally, by then, I was extremely concerned. Luckily, shortly after, the cops and the mall cops show up. I immediately made it clear that I was uncomfortable and not involved with them. Apparently they were stealing and causing trouble all over the mall. Thankfully they were removed from the mall, and my boyfriend ended up showing up shortly after. Everything turned out okay, and I don't think they were actually going to try to hurt me with a bunch of people around. But you never know. It was definitely a freaky encounter for sure, and I don't know what happened to them after that. Up until junior year of high school, I flew mostly under the social radar and stuck to my status as a nerd girl. But when I was 15, I joined varsity cheer. My school's cheerleaders weren't popular by definition, but everyone kind of knew we were because we were on the announcements, performed at pep rallies, and generally engaged with the students a lot. I made a lot of friends that year, and some of them happened to be the cool kids. For a while, I thought this was my long-awaited karma payoff for the years of bullying I'd suffered at their hands. I even developed a crush on one of them, a crush which the junior cheer captain herself volunteered to help me pursue. Homecoming is a big deal where I'm from, and I began to fantasize about my crush asking me to go with her. I'd heard rumors he was planning a dramatic proposal, and as homecoming season approached, I became more and more sure I would be his date. The junior cheer captain, who was close with him, kept dropping hints that I was right. One day at practice, she asked me what my favorite candy was, and I knew it would be so my crush would know what to give me. You can imagine my surprise when, after an exhausting theater rehearsal, I walked into the parking lot and was confronted by a guy I hardly spoken to, asking me to be his date. My theater friends all applauded, assuming I was overjoyed. I saw both my parents in the parking lot recording the whole surprise, but most importantly, the cool kids I'd recently befriended were standing there right behind him, egging him on. I didn't understand why, because he was not popular at all. In fact, he was known to be kind of creepy. The junior cheer captain was laughing, encouraging him to give me the box of my favorite candy he was holding. She definitely orchestrated the whole thing. I didn't really know the guy, but I didn't want to humiliate him in front of the coolest kids in school, so I faked a smile and rolled with it. I promised myself I'd deny him later, in private, so he wouldn't be embarrassed. Afterwards, when my parents excitedly asked me how I felt about the whole ordeal, I explained how uncomfortable it made me. I said that I got strong creepy vibes from the guy. That did not fly with my parents. My mother accused me of having expectations too high, and my father demanded to know if I was secretly a lesbian. To make his case stronger, I just become best friends with the only openly gay girl our school had ever seen. Long story short, I knew that if I shut my date down, I'd effectively declare war on my parents. However, I played my dad's protective instinct against him and persuaded him to let me friend-zone my date. After all, he knows how high school boys think, right? I texted my date that night and explained that I only saw us as friends, but would still be happy to go to homecoming with them. He was very polite about it, although I could tell he was interested in me romantically. It seemed we'd reach a deal until the next day at school, when one of my cheerleader friends referred to my date as my boyfriend. I corrected her and told her we're just going to homecoming as friends. She seemed confused and told me my date was telling anyone who would listen that I was his girlfriend. A few more of my friends approached me with similar comments, and I confronted my date about them. He denied all involvement and suggested it was just a rumor. I reminded him that we were just friends. I had zero romantic interest in him. He said he understood. I got a call from the junior cheer captain. She pretended to be sweet and conspiratorial, but I was still annoyed that she led me to believe that my crush would ask me to homecoming. She began her attempt to persuade me that I was wrong to friend-zone my date. She said that she'd spent many afternoons planning his proposal with him, and she knew he was kind of creepy from afar, but he was sweet and caring underneath all that. I said, if he was such a catch, she should date him. Annoyed, she dropped the sweet act. She told me that I had to date him because he liked me so much, that he'd gone to so much trouble to ask me to homecoming. I had to give him a chance because he'd gone out on a limb for me. I told her she was wrong, and I didn't have to do anything I didn't want to. I owed him nothing. I ended up hanging up on her soon after that, but that was just the beginning. Starting the next Monday, he would corner me in the hallway and give me a rose he held in his teeth. He usually did so between my 6th and 7th periods, when my path through the hall crossed his. I was deeply uncomfortable with this and told him so, but he wouldn't stop. I took different routes to escape him, but the junior cheer captain and her posse made a point of tracking me down so he could find me elsewhere. Every time he did this, everyone in the area would treat it as a sweet, romantic gesture, despite my obvious discomfort. Wouldn't any girl be lucky to have a boy so devoted to her that he gave her a rose every day? He was still telling everyone I was his girlfriend. The final straw for me was when he walked into a class he wasn't in to find me and give me my daily rose. My teacher, who was friends with the junior cheer captain, let this happen. For weeks afterwards, she would ask me about my date every day. When he came in, I told him to get out and leave me alone. His feelings were clearly hurt, and he left, looking like a kicked puppy. My classmates started calling me a cold hard bitch. It didn't matter what I had to say about him. I was an ice queen, refusing this sweet boy's advances. Everyone in the school had decided that I was in love with him, and nobody cared what I had to say about it. My crush, who was part of the popular group, joined the cheer captain in pressuring me into returning my date's feelings. At every event where the cheerleaders were present, my date would push his way to the front of the crowd. He would go to great lengths to get my attention. At football games, he would have a flag in the student section, so I'd look at him when we were cheering. The other girls would make comments on how endearing he was when he waited in the parking lot by our bus back to the school. Also, he could hug me and tell me how great I did. I didn't know what else to do other than to let this happen. I had only recently ascended to a position of visibility. If I conflicted too hard with the cool kids, who were so dead set on setting me up with this guy, I could be an outsider all over again. I hoped that if I just kept ranting to my real friends about how creepy he was and publicly let him do what he wanted, it would all blow over. My school had a 15-second attention span, so some scandal had to one-up me sooner or later. The truth emerged, as usual, in the locker room. It turns out the junior cheer captain had been telling him, during their afternoon trips together, that I was into him. He'd come to her for help, announcing his crush on me, and she'd gone a step further and convinced him I felt the same, despite the fact that I didn't even know his name. She'd lied to him for weeks prior to the homecoming proposal, and when I told her that was wrong, she did not care. She told me I should be grateful because everybody was starting to think that I was gay. My best friend and I, inspired, spread a rumor that we were dating. After all, everybody already thought I was gay, right? But my date wasn't fazed. In fact, he told everyone that he just turned me straight again. Ew. 3 weeks after he asked me, it was finally homecoming night. Thanks to cheer obligations and a complete coincidence involving a switched backpack that left me without my dress, I ended up only attending the dance for half an hour. My date awkwardly stood on the other side of the room while I danced my heart out to Mr. Brightside. I almost felt bad for him when, right at the end, the junior cheer captain appeared like a summoned demon to suggest we slow dance at the next opportunity. Thank God I escaped that one by walking to the DJ and suggesting he play Footloose. My date walked me out to the parking lot to wait for my mom to pick me up while we waited for her to drive around, which took entirely too long because she'd hoped I'd stop making a fuss and date him. He asked me out. I politely declined. He quickly stammered that we could go with a group of people like the junior cheer captain and my crush. I denied him again and made it clear we were only friends. I wasn't interested in romantic endeavors because I was too busy. That was actually true. I was in all advanced classes, varsity theater, and cheer, and I also worked part-time. A few days later, a teacher eloped to Vegas, and nobody cared about my love life anymore. My date and I were distanced again by classes and activities and work. It appeared that everything was going back to normal. That Friday at the football game, My crush asked me to sit on his shoulders for the alma mater. Overjoyed, I accepted, and I hoped this was the beginning of a new chapter for me. I ignored the frantically waving flag in the stands. On Monday, my date stood on a chair in his second period class and announced that everyone should be wary of my crush because he would steal your girl. I heard everyone buzzing about it a few hours later when someone called me a bitch, again, for breaking my date's heart. I knew I was being dramatic, but I decided not to go to lunch that day, terrified of running into him. I'm so glad I didn't. Later, I saw on Snapchat that my date had carved my name into his arm with a pair of scissors. His bleeding arm was screenshotted and sent to me by half a dozen people, most of them demanding why I'd hurt him like this. He did it in the middle of lunch in a crowded cafeteria, and somehow no administration noticed or cared. The school was buzzing. My date was a broken-hearted victim, and I was the evil, secretly gay bitch who would not give him a chance. I got so many dirty looks. By fifth period, I was ready to just walk out, but my good girl instincts kicked in, and I decided to tough it out for 2 more hours. Around that time, I got a panicked text from one of my cheer friends. While she'd initially been insistent that I date this creepy guy, she'd apparently changed her mind after the lunch incident. She told me that my date, who was in her 5th period class, was going off the rails. He had started out saying that he wanted to kill himself because I would not love him. This had escalated to saying he would kill my crush for lying to me and stealing me away. Finally, he started talking about how he knew where I lived. My parents had given him my address when he initially wanted to ask me to the dance. He said he would make me pay for wronging him. I knew that, after 6th period, our paths would cross in the hall. Since the beginning of this ordeal, the school had cracked down on students getting outside. My alternate route to escape him was no longer an option. My class was at the far end of the hall with nowhere to go but into the central hub, and he would be coming from the other end of the hallway towards mine. I was stuck up a chimney, basically. Desperate, I texted the junior cheer captain to finish what she started and tell him that I was not and had never been interested in him. She'd made this mess, and I would make sure she had to clean it up. She said she'd go to the counselor, but she didn't know what else to do. This was way beyond her control now. For the first and only time, I skipped class. I hid out in the theater hall and waited for 7th period. I got a few texts during the passing period that my date was waiting for me by the bathrooms. There was a little alcove right there where you can't see people coming around the corner, and the thought of him hiding there and waiting for me to walk by alone horrified me. Right before 7th period began, a few of my classmates burst in. They were cackling and proclaimed that my date was coming down here after school to kill my crush. They thought this was hilarious, but judging by the look on my crush's face, this wasn't a joke to him anymore. Our teacher brushed this off as typical theater drama, pun fully intended. I watched the clock and tried not to cry, knowing that, by the time the bell rang, my date would be waiting outside for me and my crush to emerge. That day ended up being a work day, so my crush and I were able to escape the classroom and hide out elsewhere in the theater hall to get away from him. He opted for the black box theater, and I went for the lighting closet. Obviously, I didn't witness what happened, but my best friend filled me in afterwards. Allegedly, my date had turned up 3 minutes before the bell rang and stood outside the classroom where we couldn't see him when we opened the door. He told everyone standing around that he was ready to have a knife fight with my crush. We didn't know if he actually had a knife or not, but the idea that he might was enough to terrify me. His arm was wrapped in paper towels that was bleeding through. My best friend told him my crush and I were gone, but he didn't believe her. He stood outside for 25 minutes until the administrators began walking through to make sure no one was in the school who shouldn't be. My date wasn't in the theater, so he wasn't allowed to stick around. That night, I messaged him that not only would I never date him, but could no longer even see a friendship between us. I sent him a number to the suicide hotline and told him to get help. Finally, I told him that he needed to learn what no meant, and I never wanted to speak to him again. He responded that he was sorry, and he asked if there was anything he could do to fix this. I told him no. I don't think he learned the meaning of the word after all. He ended up pulling some seriously weird shit, even until after we graduated. None of it was as epic as junior homecoming, but it definitely cast a shadow over the latter half of my high school experience. For the months after homecoming, things started to settle down again. I didn't have any classes with my stalker, and the only other person I still had to deal with was the junior cheer captain. She would go out of her way to be nice to me, inviting me to parties and buying me coffee and giving me rides to games, basically bribing me to keep quiet about what a manipulative person she was. My stalker reappeared on Valentine's Day 2016. I was still a junior, but I had almost forgotten that homecoming even happened when, halfway through my day, he cornered me in a hallway and gave me a rose out of his teeth. I hoped that would be the end of it, but I underestimated my classmates' appetite for drama. During 7th period theater, we were in the library computer lab. After the rose thing, my crush from fall semester, who had since come out as gay, warned us that my stalker was carrying around a present for me in his backpack. I thanked him for the heads up and told my best friend. She and I were sitting together on the inside row when the bell rang. We stood up to leave, but the girl on the other side of me turned to face us, blocking us off from the exit. She was a close friend of the junior cheer captain's. She asked me what I was doing after school, and I knew that she must be trying to herd me towards my stalker so I could collect my presents. I leveled with her and said I knew my stalker was waiting for me somewhere, and I told her straight up that I was not going to play nice with him anymore. She turned on the same old guilt trip as everyone else, telling me how much he cared about me, how hard he worked on these presents, but I refused to go. I knew I needed to get out of the school as soon as possible before she just told my stalker to come meet me at the library instead of the theater hall. To get her out of my way, I said I'd go meet him after I went to the bathroom, and she moved out of my way. My best friend and I hid out in the bathroom farthest from the theater hall. I knew he wouldn't leave until he delivered his gifts, and we had rehearsal that day, so I knew I'd have to go down there sooner or later. My best friend suggested she go down there and retrieve the presents for me, so he'd leave before I had to go to rehearsal. 2 more of my friends happened upon our bathroom crisis, and they decided to link up with my best friend on her mission. I waited in the bathroom while they went to intercept the gifts. 20 minutes later, they returned. Among the gifts were 3 boxes of my favorite candy, an expensive Doctor Who jewelry box, and a full bouquet of roses. Again, they told me, laughing uncomfortably, that there'd been a whole group of people waiting for me to walk into the theater hall. My stalker wasn't too happy to hand over these presents, but my friends made it clear I would not be coming to get them, so he could hand them over to my friends, or never deliver them at all. After about 10 minutes, the group waiting for me dissipated, and my stalker gave away the gifts. I was so creeped out that I didn't keep any of them. For my birthday, a few weeks later, I got out of school after 4th period and went to a theme park with my cousin. I didn't tell anyone I was leaving or where I was going. My best friend told me my stalker had waited outside the theater hall for me, with a letter and a rose in hand, until the school kicked everyone out who wasn't in the theater. I was assistant director and night crew for a 1-act play that spring. An acquaintance of mine who didn't keep up with gossip was in charge of making the program, and she mentioned how cute my boyfriend was for taking an ad in the program for me. I was sufficiently freaked out. I told her I didn't have a boyfriend, and I asked to see the ad he paid for. It was a picture of my stalker and I from junior homecoming, along with a note that said something like, "Good luck, Saucy. I love you." I begged my friend not to put it in the program, and she didn't, seeing my obvious discomfort. She refunded him his money, and made some excuse about a local business buying more ad space. He tried the same trick for the last show of the year, which I was actually in. He showed up to opening night and got kicked out for filming. The theater department has now instituted a widespread rule of checking with the person an ad is targeted at before printing it, which is more than the school administration ever cared to do. During a cleanup day for theater the summer before senior year, a guy from a different school showed up to help. He'd been talking to me over social media for a few weeks, and I knew I was his next target. He made a game out of going on a date with every girl in our department. Sure enough, he asked me out while I cleaned up the prop closet, and I agreed. He was decent looking, and he wasn't mentally unstable, even if he was a fuckboy. I also knew that, if I played my cards right, I could turn this to my advantage. He was using me, so I just made sure I got something out of it too. We went on our date. On the way home, I directed the conversation towards homecoming. He caught my drift and asked me right there, no muss, no fuss. I said yes. Senior year started. My new date was all the way over at his school on the other side of town. My stalker was in 2 of my classes and had taken the same lunch as me. I was hyper aware of him staring at me that day, but I didn't want to make a big deal about it. I knew he wanted my attention, and I refused to give it to him. Instead, I went about my life as usual. I made friends with the teachers who were lunch hall monitors so I could leave the cafeteria, effectively avoiding my stalker. I ate lunch in the theater hall with my best friend every day. I asked my biology and English teachers not to make me sit by him or work in groups with them. They agreed, if somewhat reluctantly. They, like pretty much everyone else, thought I was a dramatic cheerleader making up stories. I was a senior, and I really didn't want to deal with the bullshit of a crazy stalker anymore. Not that I ever wanted to in the first place. Homecoming was even earlier this year than last year. In English class, my stalker sat near 2 theater girls who usually walked to 7th period with me, and he turned around to ask them for ideas on how to ask me to homecoming. They were in the camp of classmates who were amused by my stalker's antics, so they wanted to rile him up and watch the fireworks. They also knew about the fuckboy I was talking to, because theater kids are the worst gossips ever, and they gleefully told my stalker that I already had a date. He proceeded to attempt to bite his finger off in class, which went about as well as you might think. Obviously, he did not succeed, but he did draw blood, and he terrified my 2 theater friends who had incited his instability. He stared at me the whole time, and I sat on the other side of the room and ignored him. I didn't care what he did. I refused to give him my attention. I would not be intimidated by him anymore. After class, my 2 friends came up to me. They told me the details of what just happened. Together, the 3 of us approached the English teacher. She fully believed me this time. He was moved into a different English class by the next week. I didn't have to worry about him after 4th period because I skipped lunch every day. I was getting confident about my escape maneuvers. I forgot to mention the 3rd and weirdest self-harm incident. After getting kicked out of English class, he desperately wanted my attention, so he got a hall pass out of his class one day and found mine. He walked to the trash can outside the door to my class, and I watched in horror and disgust as he had pulled a tooth out and held his face over the trash can, spitting out blood. I know I said I wasn't giving him attention anymore, but the kid just ripped out a part of his body. I feel like I'm allowed to be terrified. Then, my usual hall monitor was gone, and I got stuck in the cafeteria. I had been out of lunch for so long that I'd forgotten my stalker was in the same one until I accidentally made eye contact with him, staring at me from across the room like some kind of grudge ghost. The second I saw him, he started speed-walking across the room to my table. I ignored him, hoping he was just trying to psych me out, but it didn't work. He sat down in the seat next to mine. I was freaking out. I looked at the girl on the other side of me and begged her to get him out of here, She simply laughed at me. A year before, I would have kept quiet and dealt with my discomfort for fear of people hating me, but I was a year older and already contracting senioritis, so I stood up, grabbed my backpack, and stomped out of the lunchroom. The hall monitor stopped me, asking me where I was going and if I had a hall pass. I said I was going to see the crisis counselor, and he let me go, probably because he didn't want to touch that with a 10-foot pole. I walked directly to the counselor's office, signed in, and found myself sitting in her office a few minutes later. I told her the whole story from the beginning. I'd been to her office once before, and she shooed me away, saying I was being too dramatic. This time, she didn't. Instead, she spent the greater half of the hour I was there asking why I hadn't come to her when this all started. When I finally got to address the actual problem, her first question reaffirmed my fears. She asked me, after I told her about the self-harm and threats and general creepery, what about it made me so opposed to dating him. I thought I was gonna scream. I had a gut feeling that the truth wouldn't get me anywhere, and I needed action. I didn't care how I got it done, but I needed him out of my life, and definitely out of my classes. So, knowing full well her attachment to Jesus, I pulled the saving myself for Jesus card. I put all those Sundays being forced to go to church to good use, and it worked. She stopped asking me why I waited, why not just date him, and asked me what would make me feel safer. I told her to get him out of my schedule, and she said she'd look into my options. Within a few days, I was called back to her office. She'd gotten him placed in another lunch period, but biology was only offered fourth period, and both of us needed it to graduate. I still considered this a victory. I only had to see him for 50 minutes each day. She told me to come talk to her whenever I needed someone to lean on. She would make sure my teachers understood. Fun fact, junior year, my best friend was sexually assaulted by an adult man. When she left class, mid-panic attack, to go see this crisis counselor, she was told to pull herself together and get back to class before she missed anything important. My stalker found new methods of seeing me. My best friends didn't make the cast of Winter Musical, but I did. I didn't realize that I'd been isolated until my stalker joined the crew and regularly tried to intimidate me. He would drill holes in set pieces that didn't need work because I was sitting near them and he wanted to watch me flinch. He would steal the props I used and hide them in the shop, so I had to be near him to retrieve them. My new crush and I were co-dance captains, and she convinced her friend, the set head, to keep my stalker off stage at all times. After musical ended in spring, my new crush told me she heard my stalker was getting angry about me playing hard to get. I was hanging out in theater hall with a few crew kids, getting ready for a one-act play, when one of them pointed at me, shocked, and went, "You're saucy." He told me he'd seen pictures of my backyard. I was confused and weirded out, so he explained that my stalker had showed him pictures of my backyard and porch. I asked to see them, and he said he didn't have the pictures. He'd just been shown them by my stalker. I didn't really believe him, and he could tell, so he said, "You have a big bay window in your living room, a bunch of bikes on your back porch, and a big-ass rose bush." It was an accurate description. I don't know for sure how to explain that, but I've theorized that my stalker had, at some point, been in my backyard before we adopted our purebred Doberman. The dog had freaked out in the middle of the night a few times, but we brushed it off. Now, I wasn't so sure. My bedroom was in the front of the house, so I tried to reassure myself by thinking that he hadn't seen me changing or anything really scary, but it didn't really help. My best friend was disowned by her mother and stepdad, and within a week, she was shipped off to live with her biological father. I told myself I could survive the next 4 months and graduate, and then I'd never see my stalker again. I persuaded my parents, as prom and graduation approached, that I only wanted one present, my best friend. They paid for her plane ticket both ways and flew her home to be my date to prom. I kept her a secret so I could surprise her other friends when she showed up at prom to dance with us. My stalker only briefly entertained the thought of asking me to prom, which I later discovered was the cheer captain's doing. I guess she finally started to realize the full effect of her actions because she told him he needed to leave me alone. I didn't know what else she said, but he went eerily silent in the weeks leading up to prom. He still came to the last play of the year, but he didn't film me this time. He waited for me outside the auditorium afterwards, but I was with other people on our way to cast dinner, and he didn't try anything. At prom, my friends were elated when they saw my best friend had returned. We danced, talked shit, and had a great time together. It was honestly one of the best moments of my life when they walked in and saw her. Of course, my stalker tried one last time to change my mind. My friends and I were sitting alone at one of the tables together, laughing and catching up, and I saw my best friend's expression turn into a glare when someone walked up behind me. I turned around to see my stalker waiting behind my chair. I stood up and said, as calmly as possible, that he wasn't welcome here. I was also 17 and pissed off and feeling unstoppable, so I tacked on, "If you ever speak to me again, I'll rip your dick off." It was the last thing I ever said to him. My best friend flew away again. We all graduated, and everyone went their separate ways for college. I saw my stalker again at the first homecoming after I graduated high school, but he didn't talk to me. He just stared at me the whole game. Later, he showed up to my sister's fall play at our alma mater. He asked a cast member where she was and if I was there. Luckily for me, the cast member was one of my littles, and he told my stalker he needed to leave immediately. I guess this story has a happy ending. I got away in one piece, with no foreseeable appearance of my stalker in my future. The worst part, looking back, was somehow being at fault for everything. To this day, people from my high school reference this whole ordeal as, "That time you wouldn't date that poor shy kid." I can't even appreciate red roses anymore. To my dad, I do, in fact, like boys. I just like girls too, but for the sake of the subreddit and my happiness, homecoming date from hell, worst set crew member ever, and bringer of teeth, roses, and junior mints. Let's not meet again. I grew up with my parents, who were reasonable, loving people, but who were also more than a little paranoid when it came to the internet. Anything that allowed anonymous communication in any form was banned, point blank from the household. Even Club Penguin wasn't allowed because you could chat in it. Naturally, when I got my first laptop at 12, the first thing I did was start trying to talk to people online. I wasn't going into chat rooms or anything, but my parents' warnings still resonated with me, but I wasn't avoiding contact either. I ended up making a DeviantArt account, where I didn't do much posting, as I lack artistic talent. In spite of this, however, I was contacted via private message by a guy. His profile picture was the Joker. That should have been a warning sign in of itself, honestly. Joker just started talking to me out of the blue. I think I commented on one of his pieces or something. He reached out to me to thank me for my kind words. We started talking. It turned out we had a lot of common interests. We played some of the same games, liked the same cartoons, and that kind of thing. He seemed like a really, really nice guy. I think it was maybe a week or two in that the first uncomfortable thing happened, even if I didn't exactly think much of it at the time. The two of us shared a somewhat misanthropic view of the world, so there was a lot of dark jokes passed back and forth between us. Sometime about a week after we first started messaging, he casually mentions thinking that the world would be better off without him. I sent him a sad face and assured him that it wouldn't, as I quite liked talking to him. He didn't say anything more about it then, so I assumed that was it. It wasn't. Joker talked about killing himself a lot. His talking about it quickly morphed from passing commentary to long, graphic rants about how much he hated himself, how much he wanted to die, and what method would be best for him to do so. I spent hours talking him down over chat, terrified that one day I wouldn't be able to do enough and he'd actually do it. His messages started to get creepy in a different way. He started telling me how grateful he was to have me, how no one had ever cared about him as much as I did, how important I was to him, how he couldn't live without me, how he would just die if he ever were to lose me. He was obsessed. Well, one day, a couple months in, my laptop breaks. It wasn't too bad, but it still took a couple of days before everything was back in working order. I logged back into DeviantArt to find dozens of messages, all from Joker. They started off normal enough, but quickly became frantic after I didn't respond. The last message he sent was along the lines of, "I can't take this anymore," followed by a link to a picture image. The image was a pair of slit wrists. The cuts were deep and fairly fresh looking too, with red inflamed edges, and the beginnings of an ugly scabbing just beginning to settle over the top. I was horrified. I quickly messaged him back, terrified I just lost a friend, and he responded, "I thought I'd lost you," he said. "I thought you'd left me. I couldn't handle the pain without you. Don't ever do that to me again." I said I wouldn't, and he seemed relieved. He only got worse from then on. It reached a point to where practically our every conversation consisted of him either professing his obsession with me, threatening suicide, or both. The stress was keeping me up at night. I was terrified that one day soon I'd open up the chat to see nothing. I was utterly convinced it was my job to keep this guy alive, and that I was failing miserably at it. Joker kept escalating until one day, nearly a year in, he finally said something that frightened me so badly I had to leave. Joker started talking about how I was the last person left on this miserable planet and stuff like that. He waxed poetic about how much he wanted to kill himself and said that he finally found a way to be truly happy. He said the only way he'd ever be able to find happiness was in killing himself and taking me with him. That way we would always be together, free from the cruel weight of the world. He started going into very detailed, very graphic descriptions of how he'd kill me. A lot of them involved carving my heart out, then clutching it to his chest and laying beside me as he took his own life. I was terrified, enough so that I did what I should have done a long time ago and deleted that account. For years following that incident, I never spoke to anyone online, even to this day actually. There's still a lingering sense of dread when it comes to online interaction. So, to the boy who I thought was my first internet friend, I don't know what your deal was. Whether you were mentally ill or purposely malicious or some kind of combination of the two. Back when I was 16, I briefly dated a guy named Tyler for what was maybe almost 5 months. We broke up when my mom's job moved us 3 states away. We were young, and I didn't want to maintain a long-distance relationship while I was trying to adjust to moving from what had been my home for 10 years and starting at a new school. We stayed casual friends until a mutual friend told me he began spreading gross rumors that he'd popped my cherry before I left, and after I confronted him about it and he admitted to it, I told him I never wanted anything to do with him again. I blocked him on Facebook and his numbers from my phone. I didn't even spare him a second thought until 3 years later. I just moved into my first apartment with my boyfriend of 2 years and 2 friends of ours. I had a job I loved, a great relationship with our roommates, and it was an ideal arrangement for all of us. One night I opened my Yahoo account for the first time in a little over a year from my desktop, rather than my phone. Immediately, I had an instant message from Tyler. I'd forgotten that back when I used the desktop version frequently, my settings had me automatically log into the messenger, and I hadn't removed him from my contacts. By now, we were both nearly 21, and I had done a lot of growing up, so I assumed Tyler probably had too, and was initially comfortable catching up with him. He'd always been a bit awkward, but I was too, and the conversation was fairly pleasant. The usual, how have you been, and whatnot, with me doing most of the talking since, in comparison, I'd had more opportunities granted to me where I live now compared to mine in Tyler's hometown, where he still lived. Eventually we signed off since I had work the next morning, and while I wouldn't have considered us friends again, I was happy it was civil. But then he started getting weird. Eventually I added him back on Facebook, and he would randomly send me messages about going through my pictures and liking how much I'd grown up and what a woman I'd become. At first I brushed it off as awkward flattery, but then he started talking about the things he wanted to do to me. Sexual things. I firmly reminded him I had a serious boyfriend and how inappropriate his comments were. He would apologize, only to do it all over again the next day. I got sick of it and blocked him again. I told him on Yahoo that if he didn't stop, I would be contacting the authorities. It was a bluff, hopefully meant to scare him, and it worked for a few hours before he decided to send a message detailing the violent, sexual things he wanted to do to me. At this point I was beyond annoyed and disgusted, so I told him if he ever contacted me again, I would send the screenshots of everything he said to his very Christian mother, who was graciously letting him live rent-free with her. I blocked him on my Yahoo account after that, and never heard from him again, assuming he was now out of my life. How I wish that was true. Fast forward a few years. I'm 25, happily married, and my husband and I had just returned to the States after living in Japan for a few years due to his military career. Shortly after we got settled in at our new place, I took a trip to my hometown to spend time with my family and catch up with a few friends. Over coffee, a longtime mutual friend of mine at Tyler's, Amber, divulged to me that Tyler had been cyberstalking me. Okay, I thought, but that's not really anything serious. I had nothing to hide from anyone. I was blissfully happy, but she started going into detail. I had moved 3 times to 2 different states, and then to Japan since I'd last spoken to Tyler, and I was now living in a 3rd new state. Amber said each time I moved, Tyler would suddenly talk about wanting to attend a university in whatever city I moved to. When I moved to Japan, he claimed to be saving up for a vacation there, specifically the area we were stationed in, rather than a place like Tokyo, Okinawa, or the other big tourist cities. It was weird to be sure, and Amber told me she knew Tyler was stalking my Facebook under a fake name. He openly admitted it to her, but he would never tell her the name he used. She was really concerned about his behavior and admitted she was only still in touch with him because of it. In truth, apparently he'd become infamous in our circle of mutual friends for being a creep and sexually harassing several women, successfully chasing all of them off. I felt uncomfortable with the knowledge. If her timeline of things were true, he'd been keeping up with my movements for nearly 6 years. But what could I do? Neither of us knew the name he was using, and if all he was doing was following when and where I moved, I didn't think there was any harm to it beyond just creeping me out, since he was very unlikely to be able to travel to wherever I was at the time anyway. I went home and eventually forgot what Amber had told me, since there really wasn't anything I could do about it. I wasn't receiving any harassing emails or texts, so out of sight, out of mind. Months passed and I went to work as usual. I was a hostess at an upscale local restaurant, and one night a coworker, a fellow hostess named Gina, said, "Oh hey, you had a friend stop by here yesterday." Friend? I'd moved here nearly a year ago by now, but the only friends I had were my coworkers. When I asked her who, assuming it was just a regular I was friendly with. I felt my heart stop when she replied, "Tyler." I asked if she was sure, and she vaguely described his appearance, assuring me that she told him I was off that day, and she didn't know when I would work next. Hiding my panic, I claimed not to know anyone called Tyler, and that maybe he was looking for a previous employee. My first name is pretty common, and then I excused myself to go to the bathroom. Sure enough, there was a message from Amber when I opened my phone. She'd come home from work to see a Facebook post, which she screenshot and sent to me. It was about a friend of hers and Tyler visiting the city next to where I lived. It's a huge tourist attraction, and Tyler had gone with them. The restaurant I currently worked for only had maybe 7 locations scattered in various areas surrounding the tourism hub, each with a company name and add-on, depending on the specific location in town to make them easy to find. The co-workers I was friends with would tag me as checked in with them on Facebook when we would have drinks together after work, and it seemed Tyler had been using them to find which one I worked at. Terrified, I spoke to my manager and told him everything that Amber had told me, and that Tyler had apparently showed up looking for me. Placidly, he let me have the following day off. I still had to finish my shift. We had no one available who could cover for me to go home. But he did give me the tasks that kept me away from working the front door, and since it was a slow night, Gina let me go home first after I filled her in on the situation. I immediately called my husband when I clocked out. He picked me up rather than letting me walk home like I usually did. Thankfully, my husband had recently decided to switch military branches and would have to go to training for a few months. We decided that it would be better for both of us if I moved to his hometown to be near our family. I gave my job my 2 weeks' notice the next day, much sooner than planned, but my manager already knew I would be moving away and understood that I probably wanted to quit now rather than later. It's been 7 months since then. I'm happily living near my mother-in-law, literally on the other side of the country from my hometown and our last location, and I have a close-knit little group of friends in our apartment complex. I did have a complete overhaul of my Facebook settings. No one can tag me in any location or picture without my manual approval, and my current location is unlisted to anyone not on my friends list. Amber still has Tyler on her Facebook, but she says they rarely speak anymore after he was recently served with a restraining order by a mutual friend of theirs. It seems I wasn't the only person he was stalking. I'm not surprised given the stories of him that had been floating around our old circle of friends. I still get a little anxious, especially when I remember how close Tyler came to finding me, but I still don't understand why he's been keeping track of me for so long, and I don't think I ever want to know. I was selling my old car as I had bought a new one. I posted it on a couple of selling sites and Facebook. I arranged 2 visits that day and was home alone. It was broad daylight, so I assumed everything would be fine. The first one came and made an offer a little lower than what I was looking for, so I said I would get back to him later as I had another viewing. The guy from Facebook pulled up in a blacked out Range Rover, and 3 other guys got out. I opened the car and explained why I was selling it. You know when you just get a bad feeling? I wasn't sure why 4 people would need to come view an 8-year-old car. He asked if he could take the car for a drive. At this point, I was not going to get in the car with them, so I said, "Yeah, take it. I'll wait here with your friends." He asked me to get into the car, and then, what if he just took it? I said, well, it wouldn't matter. That's what insurance was for. I was not getting in the car with him. The 3 guys left, didn't speak to me, just to themselves. I couldn't understand, but it made me feel very unsure if the car would come back. The car was not worth putting up a fight for or arguing over. I questioned my life choices when he pulled back up. He got out and offered the same as the other guys from before. He said he was buying the car for his daughter. He wanted me to get in the car with him to go collect the cash. I said it was fine. His friends could take him if he needed to go, but I had another viewing and I would contact him later. I didn't want to walk back to my house, as I had now decided to sell to the other guy, as they were just giving me the creeps. He then offered more than honestly the car was worth if I went with him now. I said no and locked the car, and I started walking towards the main street, as I had seen my neighbor walking down, and shouted to him and his dog. They spoke to each other and drove off. I texted the other guy and told him the car was his. He was welcome to come over any time to get it. I filled out the V5 and off he went. That night from my living room, the black Range Rover came back and parked outside. I live in a cul-de-sac, so I am set back to where we had been. I told my husband and he looked. He commented that it was strange. Then my phone started blowing up. I politely said the car had gone and that I was sorry but I couldn't help. The car drove off and came back again about 30 minutes later. This happened about 3 times that night. It was just strange, but I thought nothing more of it, as the next few days nothing happened. On the Friday, 4 days later, I finished work early and get back. I then got the dog ready to go out. We were going to run straight to the park and run like the wind. As I got to the end of the cul-de-sac, the same car pulled up and one of the guys jumps out and said hello. I held the lead tighter and my dog was thoroughly unimpressed. She gave a bit of a grumble and he asked if he could pet her. I said no, she's a guard dog and doesn't like to be touched, and then I went to walk on. He then grabbed my arm and the dog latched onto his forearm. Cut to him screaming. There was only one other guy with him in that car. He jumped out and started shouting. This dog is the most placid and loving dog you've ever seen, and to be honest, it was a warning nip. As if she had meant to truly hurt him, she would have bit down to the bone. His friend was shouting and pulling him away. I called her back and got her to sit. A few neighbors came out and they went towards his car. I haven't seen the car since then, but honestly, I wouldn't sell something online again. That meant someone had to come to my home and pick it up. A few years ago, I reconnected with an old acquaintance on social media. It started slow. He'd like things that I posted every now and then, which grew to him liking almost everything over the course of a few months. I took it as a cue that he liked me, but was too shy to make a move. It was cute, but not something that I paid much attention to. He generally posted cryptic lyrics, and we didn't have much in common. Around the same time, I started to get that cliche feeling that I was being watched. For reference, at the time I lived in the house in the woods, it would be very easy to hide in the bushes. Our lawnmower wasn't the best, but it worked. You could adjust the height of the grass, and somehow that mechanism broke while my brother was out mowing the lawn, so we ended up with some weird patches of bald grass. No big deal. Later that night, though, I saw a post from that old acquaintance about patterns in the grass. It seemed like a song lyric, but I couldn't find a song that matched up with it. I didn't think anything of it until I was outside the next day and realized our lawn had some strange patterns after that mishap. I, being a big old paranoid weirdo, got a bit freaked out. I tried to calm myself down. It was probably nothing, right? Plus, what could I even do? It proved nothing. A few nights later, I had that same creepy feeling, and so I went out onto our porch. It's large. There is no easy way to sneak up, so I felt safe. I waited, listening for anything, and then I sort of just started yelling. I was yelling as if he was there. I said that I thought he was really creepy. I talked about all the terrible things I would do to him if he ever made the mistake of coming near me. And then I went back inside. I know it sounds dumb, but then he unfollowed me from all social media, stopped liking everything I posted, and left me alone. When I went to his profile, he deleted that song lyric about the patterns in the grass. Maybe it all was completely coincidental. That's what I'd like to believe. Maybe he finally got sick of my ramblings and that just happened to coincide with my speech. Or maybe he was out there in the woods, watching and listening. When I was a younger 20-something-year-old, I worked in a sports bar. We had an awesome lunch special and would attract the same customers on the regular. My first meeting of an older man who introduced himself as Michael wasn't a great strange deal, but noteworthy since before he cashed out, he did try to set me up with his son, who he mentioned was a lawyer. I was young and had a boyfriend at the time, and I just brushed it off. I thought I'd never see the guy again. Fast forward many months, and Michael is now a frequent regular, coming in nearly every one of my 4 to 5 lunch shifts each week. If I wasn't working and he happened to come in and ask for my section, he'd turn around and leave. Odd, but I didn't think much of it. Over the many months and numerous sections he spent dining in my section, he'd ask a ton of questions. I probably shared too much information, looking back, but this was pretty normal since I had a ton of regulars, and I often spent time chatting away with them. Michael seemed harmless enough, but there were times his questions would probe too far. He wanted to know about my boyfriend, home life, things like that. I'd usually skirt around these questions by feigning I had something to tend to. It didn't start to get really strange until the following holiday season came about, and he began bringing me gifts every time he came in. Some of these gifts were especially pricey. I always refused them since they made me very uncomfortable. In one instance, he bought me a Prada purse. I laughed and said, "Oh gosh, I can't take this. My mom would kill me if I brought this home." But he then followed with, "Well then, I'll just have to kill your mom." I laughed nervously, left the purse on the table, and tried to avoid him as much as possible until he left. I didn't quite know what to make of the whole exchange, but it did leave me feeling very uneasy. The holidays came and went, Michael continuing to frequent. Since the gifting season, I had really cut down my conversation with him and kept away from his table as much as I could each time he visited. There were many small but significant things that came up in those visits, which to be honest I can't quite remember fully, since it's so many years later. But for example, in one instance, he wrote me a 4-page letter about how he wished I was his daughter. In another, came to me with tears in his eyes and asked if I could come to his knee surgery. One time he mentioned having a wife, and this was the first I'd heard of her and was excited. I said to him, "I'd really like to meet your wife." The next day he brings his wife in. She's decked out in diamonds and wearing what looks like stage makeup. It was like a 10-year-old playing dress-up. And mind you, this was a sports bar. She was dressed like she was soon to perform an opera. As they were leaving, she pulls me aside into a plume of too much perfume and whispers into my ear, "Michael just thinks the world of you." And it was so bizarre and felt off. Many other strange things happened to the point my boyfriend at the time thought the manager of the bar should refuse service, or at the very least, I should avoid serving him. I put it off until one afternoon when he came in and started the conversation. Wow, that was quite an accident. I immediately went numb. There had been a collision in front of my house that morning. I lived nowhere near the restaurant and knew that if this was what he was talking about, it meant he had followed me at some point. He knew where I lived. When I asked him what accident he was referring to, he confirmed it was the one near my house. That was the last lunch I served him, but unfortunately, it was not the last of my encounters with Michael. In the following months, he would show up in random places at the same time as I. He even went to my mom's work to tell her what a spectacular daughter she had, and he knew of her love of painting. He wanted her to bring some of her work over for him and his wife to purchase. She of course said no thank you. During this time, he would still come into the restaurant. Although very aware I refused to wait on his table, but he would act as if nothing had changed. My boyfriend was irate that my manager would let him into the restaurant at all. My boyfriend urged me to make a police report after getting random letters in the mail from him. When I finally contacted them, a young 30-ish woman came out to my home to take the report. I told her everything and she looked at me and said, "You know, I had admirers too when I was your age." She declined to make a report, saying there wasn't really anything to note. I assumed she was right and left it alone. More things happened. He started to get obstinate and caused a ruckus a few times when I wouldn't wait on him. Finally, my manager told him he was no longer welcome in the restaurant. Time went on and I hadn't really seen Michael anywhere. Maybe 6 months passed by and one late afternoon, I see the policewoman who had interviewed me walk into our restaurant. Soon my manager comes over and says she's asking for me. It turns out she wants me to file that report after all. It turns out Michael isn't Michael. His name is Robert. Robert has just been arrested for stalking another young woman in our area, a waitress at a neighboring restaurant. He had gone so far as to following her, photographing her, and superimposing her images onto nude bodies and uploading them to the internet. I learned that Robert doesn't have a son. He doesn't have a wife. Robert has a long line of felonies and investigations against him, and apparently an affinity for young waitresses. In my last year of college, I picked up a job on campus working at the front desk in one of the residence halls. This meant that I would be working weird overnight hours, but being the night person that I am, I was all for it. At the start of the spring semester, a new student named Ryan moved into a vacant room on the first floor, not far from the front desk I sat at 3 nights a week. Ryan was a tall, lanky, 20-something-year-old guy with blonde hair who showed no expressions and seemed to be a bit socially awkward. He had an off vibe about him from the start. In that first week, he came to the desk frequently to ask questions, and I gave him the best advice I could. Well, my kindness might have been a mistake. About a week later, I'm sitting at my shift, 12 a.m. to 6 a.m. I'm just minding my own business and catching up on some homework. Ryan comes running down the hall. He starts a conversation, trying to get to know me. I'm being polite and listening, knowing he probably hasn't made a lot of connections yet, being new. Well, he shifts the conversation and starts talking about religion, rambling on for the next hour and a half about biblical plagues, the world ending, how the peace sign means that you praise the devil, inquiring about my own personal beliefs, aggressively telling me that I'm going to hell, and how he decided to join the jiu-jitsu club so he could learn how to crush someone's windpipe. I've only said a few words. Red flags were going up in my head the whole time, realizing that this guy might not be stable. He's pacing the floor and raising his voice at me, so I started recording the conversation in case I needed proof from my boss or if something were to happen. I even had the campus police number pulled up on my phone because the conversation started getting extremely uncomfortable. He had a lot of anger in his voice. He would stare at me without blinking while he talked. As he carried on, I started to ignore him, in hopes that he would leave. It was almost 2 a.m. at this point, and I was all by myself. Luckily, he eventually went to bed, and when he did, I called my boyfriend immediately, almost in tears, to tell him what happened. Over the next few days, my coworkers would update me that Ryan had come to the desk looking for me, asking questions like, what is her work schedule and where does she live? Knowing that I work mostly nights, this was unsettling because I did not like being at the desk alone with him. This continued over weeks, where he would come to the desk and ramble for an hour or more about unsettling ideas and his religion. He would ask me questions about another girl who lived there. Things like if he could have her number, what floor she lived on, what her room number was, and if she was single. He made it very clear, though, that he would only want her if she was a virgin. Otherwise, he said she wasn't worthy of him. Just very odd things to tell someone who sits at the desk in the middle of the night. It got to the point that if I heard a door open on the first floor, I would run to hide in the closet so he wouldn't know I was working. Sometimes my boyfriend would go sit there with me if Ryan wouldn't leave. Another night specifically, I messaged a coworker to call me from the front desk phone and say that there was an incident that they needed help with on the 3rd floor, just so I could escape. He tried to follow me upstairs, putting his hand on the elevator door so it wouldn't shut. I pretended like I was taking a form up to my coworker and hid out in the 3rd floor common area for about 30 minutes, hoping he would be gone. When I got off the elevator, right as the doors opened, I saw his expressionless face staring back at me, like he waited the whole time for me to come back. I acted like I got the wrong form, switched it, and headed back upstairs for another 45 minutes to be sure he was gone. Luckily, when I came back, he was. I eventually brought it up to my boss, as did a few coworkers of mine who were worried about my safety, since it was always the middle of the night that decided to feed off my vulnerability of being alone. She ended up having a conversation with him because he was making a lot of residents and staff uncomfortable. She said the next time he gets a complaint, they're filing it with campus police. After the first 2 months, I did not have any other issues with him, but I always hid any time I thought he was coming. Leaving work was very scary because I had to park so far and the parking lot wasn't very well lit, but I'm very thankful nothing bad ever happened. I'd hate to think about how long this could have gone on or what could have happened if I said the wrong thing during one of those creepy nights. I work the night shift at a hotel, so I've had a ton of weirdos come through, but this is the most recent. Everything started off normally. Usually once I clock in at 11 p.m., I can just sit at the desk and only see a few people. I'm a loner, and I prefer it this way. Anyways, about 2:30 in the morning, a guy in his 30s comes down and stands in front of me at the desk. I worked this job for 5 years, so I can pick out the weirdos pretty well. I knew right away something was off about him. He didn't say anything at first, just stared at me, so I asked, "Can I help you?" He mumbles something. All I can make out is the word, coffee. I tell him there's fresh coffee available in the breakfast area behind him. He turns to look and then looks back at me, confused. "Do you have some coffee I can take back to my room?" My first thought is, this guy is drunk as hell, and I told him he could take a cup of the already made coffee, or I could give him a couple packs to take to his room. He wanted the packs, so I grabbed a couple and gave them to him, hoping that's all he wanted, and I could go back to watching TV. No such luck. He kept standing in front of me, looking at the packets of coffee, confused. I've had enough of drunk guy, so I walk over to the other side of the desk and stare at the TV, ignoring him. After a few minutes, he wanders into the breakfast area and stares at the pots of coffee. Then he wanders over to the fruit, the cereal, yogurt, back to the coffee, just staring at everything and walking in slow circles. After a while of that, he stops looking at the food and looks at the ground, then starts muttering to himself while he's walking in circles. Now he's officially freaking me out. He's at least 6 inches taller than me and 50 pounds heavier, and I'm the only one on shift. I start thinking of escape options, like locking myself in the laundry room, running to the gas station next door, and that kind of thing. I've had to do it a few times when things have gotten really bad, so I try to plan ahead when someone's giving me bad vibes. About 15 minutes after he starts walking in circles, he heads down the hall, still muttering to himself. I relax, happy he's gone to bed to pass out, and I'll have the lobby to myself again. Probably 5 minutes later, I glance out the front doors and he's there, staring at me, smoking a cigarette, and still talking to himself. I'm starting to think he's high on drugs, and that scares me enough to grab a pair of scissors when he's not looking and hold them down by my side. I start to think about calling the police, but what for? He hasn't done anything. So I decide to wait it out and hope he goes to bed soon. It was after 3 a.m. at that point. For the next 30 minutes, he walks up and down the halls, through the lobby and outside, then comes back in through the back door and loops around again. The third time he walks by me, still talking, I was terrified and was on the verge of saying screw it, calling 911 anyway just to have someone else there with me. Just then, an old woman walks up to the desk and asks me to call her a cab. She has no idea how happy I was to see her. I call for her and just start chatting to her to keep her in the lobby. The weirdo comes around the corner for the fourth time, and the old woman tells him to pack up his stuff. They're leaving because he woke her up and she couldn't go back to sleep. Apparently this old lady is the weird guy's mom. I felt much better knowing he was going to leave as soon as the cab got there. As soon as she told him to pack up his stuff, he gets angry. He did not want to leave. He told her to go back to bed, but she was very adamant, and after they argued for a bit, he goes upstairs to pack. She explained to me she could tell he was getting agitated, and it was time to take him home. I talked to her for a while, and she opened up to me. She told me her son is a schizophrenic, and she's the only one who would take care of him. She told me she just wished someone would take him for 6 months, like a hospital, to get him on medication and into a good routine. I felt so awful for her. She seemed so tired and hopeless. I have mental issues myself, so I could relate to the struggle. All of a sudden the weird guy comes running out, demanding to stay, and they argue again. Except this time, he seemed to be watching and focused on me, storming up to the desk and screaming, "She's gonna call the cops, I didn't do anything. Are you gonna clean my kitchen? Why aren't you sucking my dick yet?" Amongst other horrible things while I just stood there, stunned. I held up the scissors to defend myself, and his mom screamed, "Stop, do you hear what you're saying to her?" He calmed down just as he snapped. The cab pulled up, and as much as I felt for his mom, I was happy to see them pull away. This happened back in 2010. I was working in a hotel in a suburban area, a nice place. When I first started there, I was both a PT front desk clerk and a PT night auditor. I'd just been promoted to a day job and had a week left at the front desk before I was switching to Monday through Friday. That night was just like any other night. At about 3 a.m., I received a phone call. The guy sounded my age, mid-20s, and attempted to strike up a conversation with me. I had to give my name when answering the phone, so he gets my name, of course. He starts asking me personal questions, things like, "Do you have a boyfriend? Would you want to go out for a drink?" and, well, that kind of thing. It was pretty harmless, but nevertheless, I tell him I'm hanging up and I had a job to do. He wouldn't give me his name. Instead, he said, "Why don't you call me John?" I hang up and finish my shift. The next night, at about 3:30 a.m., I receive another phone call from John. He started off with asking me out for a drink again, to which I declined and hung up the phone. He called back about 5 times that night, each time getting more lewd in his comments, and just tried to keep me talking. He ended his last call with the phrase, "I see you like singing karaoke. I love doing that. Let's go out together sometime." Shit, I think. He found me on Twitter. I had just gone out a few nights prior with my friends and posted about it. I asked him how he got my full name, and he wouldn't tell me. I hung up again, and he was done for that night. I deleted my Twitter and Foursquare pages, and when my boss came in at 7 a.m., I told him what had been going on. We told my general manager, and my security guard put it into his report. I only worked 2 overnights a week, luckily, but when I came back the next week, so did he. The phone call started around 3 a.m. and lasted for about an hour or so, but this time was a bit different. John was angry that I had deleted my accounts, so he couldn't keep an eye on me and make sure that I wasn't cheating on him. I told him to fuck off and that I'm not answering the phone anymore. My security guard will be taking all of my calls going forward. The phone was quiet for about 10 seconds, and then he screamed, "You're gonna be with me whether you like it or not. I'm coming for you." And he hung up the phone. I, of course, freaked the fuck out and called the police. Luckily I had my security guard there, so I wasn't completely alone. But it must have been a slow night, because it took the cops mere minutes to get there. I called my night supervisor, who left at 11 p.m., and he managed to calm me down. One cop was nice enough to stay until my shift was done, and with that, I told my boss that even though I had a week left of overnights, I couldn't and wouldn't do it. Thankfully they understood, and I moved to daytime hours, as well as I sent email out to everyone telling them that anyone who called for me was directly sent to the GM. Thankfully, everything stopped after that, minus a few phone calls the security guy got for about a week. He told the guy that I'd quit because of him, and the call stopped. It still creeps me out though. We think he may have been a former guest at the hotel, but I never found out who it was. About a year ago, I spent a decent amount of time working in a different city than I live in. One day was particularly cold, and the Airbnb I had booked was pretty far away. I didn't have a car, and I'd failed to pack a warm coat. I ducked into the Kmart nearby to buy something I could wear on my walk, with the intention of returning it the following morning. My best option was this enormous XXL fuzzy bathrobe. My walk home led me through this beautiful botanic garden along a waterway. It was nearing midnight, and I was halfway through my journey. I'm usually quite aware when I'm out, particularly at night, but I let my guard down a bit, due in part to the enormous bathrobe I had wrapped around me. It was like I was wearing a fuzzy suit of armor. Suddenly, I felt intensely uncomfortable. I couldn't quite put my finger on what I heard, but my immediate thought were a couple of males holding a whispered conversation. I rounded a corner and ducked into some trees, sucking my breath in and straining to understand what I was hearing. Light footsteps, voices. 2 men neared my hiding spot on the path, and I internally berated myself for not being more careful. Nobody was out, so screaming would do nothing. I'm a very small female, so the situation was one of my worst nightmares. As they passed, I heard, "She's around here somewhere." I felt physically sick until one of the guys let out a low whistle and I heard the jingle of a collar. A dog scurrying past my spot, and a "good girl" followed by smoochy noises. An intense sense of relief followed. They were talking about their beloved dog, not hunting me. They seemed harmless, endearing even. I readjusted my bathrobe to cover my head, and I popped out from the trees. I didn't realize until I later looked at myself in a mirror that the bathrobe's arms were now on top of my head, sticking out like some grotesque, bulbous monster appendages. I also didn't realize that the men had stopped only a few meters ahead on the path. One of the men screamed in terror when they saw me emerge from the trees. The other swore loudly, and they both took off running across the bridge over the waterway, followed closely by their dog, who was now barking frantically. I still have the picture I took of myself in the mirror after the incident. I get the giggles every time I see it. I must admit, it was a rush to finally be on the other end of a let's not meet. I was born with beautiful eyes. My eyes are dark blue on the outside, but on the inside, they're different shades of blue, and I have a bit of brown around the pupils. So I work at a gas station just off the main highway in Canada, so I meet a lot of types of people, and some are pretty creepy. I've had older men look at me and ask if my eyes were real, and if they could have them. Not that creepy, right? Well, this one guy took it a bit too far. I was outside doing some chores around the gas station like normal. It was extremely early, and the sun hadn't popped out yet. My partner was inside, but he kept watch over me through the large windows, but there was a section where he couldn't see me. That was the dumpster. I happened to be in that section cleaning up garbage when I saw a guy with a plastic bag walking up and tossing it into the dumpster. I have a habit of looking at the person who walks close to me, and when I looked at him, he must have noticed my eyes. "Are your eyes real?" he asked. "Yeah," I responded. "Wow, they are beautiful." "Thanks," I said, uncomfortably. "Can I have them?" he asked. I let out a small chuckle, thinking he was joking, as a lot of people seem to do. But when he didn't laugh and just stared at me, I began to feel uneasy. So I stopped what I was doing and turned to leave. That's when he grabbed my arm. "I want your eyes," he said. "Sir, please let me go." "Oh, come on. I want to stare at those eyes forever," he said. "Sir," I said in fear. I tried to free my arm from him, but he happened to be stronger than me and didn't let go. "Please, just let me go." I did another tug, and I finally freed myself from him and ran inside. I told my partner what had happened, but when he went outside to confront the man, he had disappeared. I honestly don't know if he was on drugs or if he was just crazy, and quite honestly, I do not want to find out. To some, this may not be as bad, but to me, it was extremely creepy. Yes, I've had people comment about my eyes, and people jokingly ask for them. My coworkers did the same when we first met. But this guy took it too far. About 12 years ago, when I was 22, I worked at a video store. It was a few days before Halloween, and my manager asked if I would work it since everyone else wanted it off. So, me being the good employee I am, I said yes and asked if I could dress up. She agreed and said I could dress up as whatever I wanted. "Can I dress up as a chick?" I was just joking actually, until she told me I didn't have the hair on my nuts to do so. Challenge accepted. I went out shopping and bought a wig, dress, and some makeup, and I even borrowed a bra from my current crazy girlfriend at the time. I did my makeup the way I saw my girlfriend do and proceeded to walk to work. Now, I only lived about a half-mile from the store, and since I lived within walking distance to everything, I didn't see the need for a car at the time. So I started walking. I had to cross a street, walk across a bridge, cut through an abandoned parking lot and through an alley, and I was there. It was dark outside, but I've never had anybody bother me while I was out for this nightly walk. That is, until this night. About halfway across the bridge, I look up and see a man in his late 20s, maybe early 30s. He was walking towards me. As I get a bit closer, I realize this fucker is checking me out. I giggle a bit and laugh at that thought. I guess I must have made a pretty hot chick. I walk past him and continue on my way. As I walk and continue to let my mind wander in La La Land, I get through the parking lot and start down the alley when I hear someone say, "Hey, sexy girl," and I feel my ass get slapped. Not like a love tap, but a full-blown, painful ass slap, the kind that leaves red marks. "What the fuck?" I yell as I turn around and confront this asshole, and I realize it was the punk I passed on the bridge. "Oh shit, man, I'm sorry." He was obviously caught off guard. Looking back on it now, I can't stop laughing, but at the time I was beyond livid. I grabbed him by the cuff of his shirt and shoved him on the ground. I moved in to kick him a few times, but he was pretty quick to get on his feet and run away. He took off the way we came, repeatedly yelling, "Shit, shit, shit." I just stood there stunned for another minute, thinking to myself, what in the hell just happened? I went into work, and as soon as my manager saw me, she started to laugh. "I didn't think you were actually going to do it," she said. Of course, she laughed even harder when I told her I was almost sexually assaulted. This happened around 2015 when I was working in a cute, fancy little boutique hotel. I worked doing a bit of everything: guest assistance, reception, service in the restaurant, drinks, whatever was needed really. One of the line cooks was from Eastern Europe. He was about mid-40s and worked full-time. He was always overly friendly with me, to the point of making me feel uncomfortable, commenting on how I looked, staring too long, standing too close, touching me where opportunity arose, just on the arms, back, and shoulders with a palm. Nothing overly outrageous, but there was a creepy feel about it. To give you a picture, I'm 5'2" and a slight build. This guy was tall, standing at about 6'5", and had a broad, strong build. He looked like he worked out. English was his second language, but he spoke it fluently. Often he would stand close to me, or stand between me and my exit where opportunity presented, and give me compliments, staring at my chest and saying, "Wow, you're good. Guys must love you. You're so beautiful. I love your legs in the uniform. You should always wear a skirt with those legs." Yada yada, that kind of thing. It was making me pretty queasy. He was also a born-again Christian and loved to recite random scriptures to me because he knew I grew up Catholic and he figured for some reason I would appreciate it. I did let him know I wasn't religious, and he volunteered that he has only recently become a born-again Christian. I asked him what made him turn to the Lord, and I really wish I hadn't. His response was, "It doesn't matter what you've done in the past, no matter what. When you become born again, you get a clean slate and forgiveness." He had the creepiest smile when he said this, and was staring at me with his head lowered. It was full-on weird. This guy's done some fucked up shit. I have zero evidence of this other than he gave me those vibes. Anyway, I went on holiday for a few weeks, and on my first shift back, I'm setting up the restaurant for the evening dinner, and he shows up for his work shift. He comes up behind me, and with his mouth and nose against the edge of my neck, he breathed me in, like smelled and inhaled me and said, "Ah, I've missed your smell." It was pretty gross. I just gave him a weird awkward smile and ushered away. I went down to the office to take a second to chill. My general manager was in there at the time, and he asked me what was up. I told him what happened, but said it wasn't a big deal, that I was fine and just wanted a second to chill. He said, "Fuck no," went up to the kitchen and fired his fucking ass on the spot. He then came back and told me I had nothing more to worry about. That was it. I never saw him again. I did kind of fear him trying to get back at me or something, but no. That was a really good shift that night. It felt great to see my boss stick up for me like that. I had booked a taxi with a licensed taxi firm to take me from a friend's house to my home in the early evening. It was dusk as the driver arrived. As I left the house to get into the car, he was coming to the house to get me, and for some reason, as he turned to walk back to his car with me, he briefly touched my shoulder with his hand. It wasn't lingering, but it was deliberate. My immediate thought was, why is this guy touching my shoulder? My intuition said it wasn't right, but I was in my 20s, and this guy must have been in his 50s. I convinced myself that it was just something people from that generation did. I sat in the back. The journey should have been around 20 minutes from North to South London, and in the first 5 minutes of the journey, there was some initial chat where he told me I was his last job for the day, and he had no plans for afterwards. When he told me that, I felt a pang of fear, but I thought, this guy's from a licensed firm. He's been identity checked and approved to do the job. His ID card with his name and photo and registration number was clearly displayed on the dash. He was from a firm my friend used regularly and had an account with, although she had not met this particular driver. My logical brain told me that he's clearly traceable to me if he decided to do anything, so he just wouldn't take that risk. Plus, it was early evening in a very busy area, and that made me feel safe. And by this time, we were already on the road. I spent the next 15 minutes or so of the journey looking at my phone. I really don't know why. Maybe I was deliberately trying to distract myself because I was nervous, but I felt my nerves were unreasonable. This was the early 2000s, so the phone would have been basic compared to today's standards, but there must have been a game or something on it that distracted me because I did not look out the window for some time until I noticed it was mostly dark. And when I did look out, I expected to be very close to my home. To my horror, I saw we were in some very deserted part of town that I'd never seen. This area was most certainly not on the way from my friend's house to mine. It should have been a straightforward drive through central London, and this was a very remote area with what looked like an abandoned housing estate and abandoned cars. I looked at the driver to ask where we were, but before I had the chance to say anything, I noticed he was repeatedly looking left and right down dark alleys that we were going past. I noticed we were slowing down. He was also breathing very weird. It was very audible, kind of like a sort of pumped, wound up kind of way. And that's when this overwhelming sense of knowing hit me. He was looking for a deserted place to stop. At that point, a very clear voice in my mind told me that he was going to do something to me and then kill me. I had to think fast. I blurted out, "I don't know where I am." He didn't say anything. I then said the words to the effect of, "My friend asked me to call her when I was home safe, and I should be home by now, so I need to call her and tell her I'm not home safe, or she will call your firm and call the police, because she's really over the top like that." That must have jolted him into thinking about the consequences of whatever he was planning to do. These were the very early days of mobile phones, and not everyone had them, especially the older generation. Perhaps it was a lifeline he hadn't considered I might try to use. With that, he turned around out of this abandoned area, and we came to a main road. After a while, I saw places I recognized. We headed towards my home. He said, "I'm sorry if I made you worried," but there was something weird about the way he said it, and that wasn't the end of it. When we got close to my home, I decided I did not want him dropping me off outside my door. I lived with my sister, but she was staying at her boyfriend's house that night, and we lived in a communal block. I was concerned he might try to come in the main front door and try to get access to my flat, so I said I realized I didn't have any milk at home. Could he drop me off at the store on the next street? He had to agree to this, obviously. I entered the store and hung around in there for a bit. I remember being completely broke in those days. My friend paid for the ride via her account. I did have milk at home, and I certainly wasn't going to buy some unnecessarily. So after a few minutes, I left the store and walked the 3 to 4 minutes back to my flat. As I approached the flat, I saw a car parked facing the main door of my flat and thought to myself, "Oh my God, it's him." And I knew he would clearly be able to see I bought no milk, as I didn't even have a bag on me, so he would know I was lying. As I passed the car, I couldn't bring myself to turn around and look at him, so I got my keys out, quickened my pace, and entered quickly. Once in my flat, I plucked up the courage to look out my window, and sure enough, it was that guy. He had driven from where he dropped me off to my flat, and he was sat in his car staring at my flat. Just then my friend called, and I told her I had only just got home. She couldn't believe how long it had taken. I explained the whole thing to her. As I was on the phone to her, I looked out the window again, and he had finally gone. I didn't report any of this at the time, and from my safe vantage point of 20 years down the line, I do regret it. But at the same time, I still doubted my gut instinct, even though I had this strong sense of knowing in the core. After the event, I convinced myself it was fleeting hysteria, and my logical brain returned. My logical brain also told me that if I did report him, nothing would be done because he hadn't actually done anything wrong. I couldn't prove anything, and even if he did admit the detour, he could say he took a wrong turn, and he would just deny having returned to my flat. but reporting him might have caused trouble for him, and he knew where I lived. That scared me more. I was always cautious around my flat after that, and thankfully, I never saw him again. I should have reported it. I know nothing would have been done, and I would have probably created a bigger risk to my safety in doing so, but I should have reported it for other people's sake. I regret not doing it. For a bit of background, I was about 8, and my mother, my little sister, and I were taking a road trip across Wyoming. This wasn't unusual, as we had family living all across the state, and my mom loved piling us into the car and driving. The memory of this event is patchy, and I remember it more for the way my mom reacted to it than for the event itself. I don't remember exactly where this was or where we were headed, but anyone who has ever driven through Wyoming knows that the roads are mostly deserted. We'd been driving for several hours behind an older green and white truck. We were approaching a gas station, and I remember my little sister being so excited because she wanted to get one of those little bottles made of wax that had juice in them. The green and white truck pulls up into the gas station, and we follow. We use the restroom, get some snacks. My mom fills up with gas, and we get into the car and back onto the road. A little time passes, and my mom asks, "Is that truck behind us the same one that we followed into the gas station?" I turn in my seat and confirm that it is the same truck. I sit back down and continue gorging myself on snacks, but I sense that my mom is uneasy. She keeps looking in her rearview mirror and watching the truck. It was a long drive to the next gas station, and along the way, the truck behind us would speed up, get dangerously close to us, and then back away a bit. After a stretch of several miles, we were nearing another gas station. My mom adjusts her mirror so she can see us in the back seat. She says, "I'm gonna pull into this gas station and open up my door like I'm getting out. I don't want you two to open your doors. Don't get out. Just sit tight and hang on." My little sister and I look at each other like, "Okay?" I thought it was strange, but the look in her eyes scared me a bit. My mom is a calm person, but she has this presence about her that makes you aware that she isn't to be messed with. All of my friends throughout the years have been a little scared of her, which is odd considering she's just over 5 foot tall and about 100 pounds. Anyway, we pull into the station and up to a pump. My mom adjusts her mirror to see behind us. She opens her door with the car still running. The green and white truck pulls in and parks just to the side of the turn-in. The driver pops his hood, gets out, walks around to the front of his truck and props his hood up. He starts messing around under the hood with his back to us. From what I remember of him, he was a really big guy, but who isn't to an 8-year-old girl? My mom slams her door and peels out of the gas station. I turn in my seat to watch the man. He turns around like he was startled, looks right at us, and quickly closes his hood. At this point, my mom is driving so fast that I'll lose sight of him. I was terrified. I knew it must be serious for my mom to drive like this. Up ahead, the road bent sharply to the left. There was a small road to the right with a few buildings. Just before the bend, my mom slams on the brakes, pulls the steering wheel all the way to the right, and, as if it was straight out of an action movie, slides around the corner. She speeds through the small parking lot of one of the buildings and parks behind it. From our vantage point, we were hidden from traffic behind us. We could still see anyone passing. A short time later, we watched the green and white truck speed right past us and around the bend in the road. Obviously, my sister and I were very shaken up. My mom asks us if we need to use the restroom, and I said yes. She said she did too, but we would have to wait here for a bit, then make our way to the next station. I'll never forget what she said next, because it was so out of character for her. She said, "I'd rather piss my pants in this car than be murdered on the side of this road." A little time passes and we got back on the road, and we continued on our trip. We never saw that truck again. In late June, my boyfriend and I were headed back from a Walmart in his town. I was driving on somewhat of a back road and there was a four-way stop. Across from me was what looked like a work truck, parked behind another car and flashing its brights. Nobody else was at the intersection, so I decided to go ahead and keep driving. As soon as I pulled out, a car came speeding from around a corner and almost T-boned my car on the passenger side. Luckily, I sped up and got out of the way. The car swerved and stopped on the side of the road and flashed its hazards. We were freaked out. Maybe it wasn't the right thing to do, but I kept driving because nobody was hurt. Probably just shaken up is all. So we kept driving, and my boyfriend was guiding me through the roads, and we were talking about how bizarre it was that we didn't see or hear the other car. Then I noticed there's a car behind us. It's probably 1,000 feet behind us, so I don't think anything of it. Then it keeps getting closer and closer. Finally, this car is on my ass. Once he's on my ass, he turns on extremely bright lights and nearly blinds me. We realized it was the work truck that was across the intersection. I ducked down out of the way of my rear view so I could see the road and keep driving. I was even speeding up a bit. My boyfriend tells me that maybe we should pull over. Maybe someone was hurt and they were flagging us down. But we were on a back road with absolutely no light posts and nowhere to pull in that was well lit. Absolutely not. Eventually, my boyfriend had to hold the wheel for me because I couldn't see at all. My vision was blurry and spotty. I started to pull into a neighborhood, but the truck started passing me and we almost got into another almost accident. The neighborhood was dark, of course. The truck slows down to a stop and backs up so that it's directly behind us, still on the main road while we parked in this neighborhood. The driver starts shining a flashlight at my car, mostly at me, then it goes over to my boyfriend. After it gets to him, the light shuts off and the truck slowly pulls off and leaves. My boyfriend and I were shaken up, and once I regained my vision, I drove us back to his apartment, wary of the cars around us. We told his dad about it, and he said it's a good thing we didn't get out of the car. People get murdered all the time from this stuff. We thought it was just weird, but thinking back on it, the driver probably saw me and targeted me, and once they realized there were two people in the car, they didn't want to deal with that and left. They wanted me, it seems. I'm a female, and a few years ago, I used to work at a job where I wouldn't usually get off until around 11 p.m. I didn't mind it for the most part. I am a night owl by nature, but I read a lot of Let's Not Meet and watch a lot of horror movies. I wouldn't say I'm paranoid, but I'm definitely cautious. This one particular night, I was driving home along one of the main roads. It was late enough that traffic was fairly scarce, but not so late that I felt like I was the only one out, especially because there'd been a Jeep behind me for a good while at that point. When it came time for me to make my first turn, the Jeep followed. This wasn't really unusual. I was still on a big road, so I didn't think anything of it. I needed to get gas, and luckily there was a fairly busy and well-lit station on my way home. So from the road I was on, you had to turn left onto a side street, then turn right onto a street that runs parallel with a grocery store, and then turn right again to get into the gas station. It's a very specific destination, and there's no through traffic. When I went to make the first left, the Jeep got in the turn lane with me. This is when I started paying attention. They had already been behind me for a good 10 to 15 minutes, and it seemed unlikely that they were just coincidentally going to the same gas station as me, considering how many were in the area. But, like I said, there's also a grocery store that's open 24 hours, so I thought maybe they were just gonna go there. However, they still followed me when I turned into the gas station. I pulled up to one of the pumps in the middle lane, put my car in park, and watched the Jeep in my rear view. There was no way in hell I was getting out of my car until I figured out what they were doing. If they pulled up to a pump and started getting gas, I'd laugh at myself and carry on. They didn't pull into a pump. They looked at the back of the lot, just idling in place, for close to a minute. Finally, they started slowly driving around the far end of the pumps until they stopped again in front of my car, roughly about 15 feet away. Unfortunately, they had tinted windows, so I couldn't see who was in the car or what they were doing. But after another brief period of time, they just drove off. I got gas and drove home. I kept an eye out, but I didn't see them again. I used to live in a somewhat sketchy part of town, and I made the mistake of returning my Redbox rental to the grocery store that I never shopped at in my area because I was afraid of this kind of interaction. My 4-year-old daughter was in my car, so I locked it and went 3 feet to the Redbox in front of me to return my movie quickly. The lady immediately spots me and says, "Hey, I need a ride up the street." She looked and sounded a little off, like maybe she was on something. It was also a 70-degree day, and that's not much excuse as to why you can't walk up the street. I responded, "No, I'm sorry. I have my kid with me. I can't do that." I started towards my car, and she was heading towards the passenger side. She said, "Come on, please. It's just up the road. It's not very far. Please." I just kept saying, "No, I'm sorry. I can't let you in the car with my kid." She looked irritated as hell with me and still stayed by the passenger door. "It's up the road. Don't be like that," she said. "No, I absolutely cannot let you in my car with my kid," I replied. Then I proceeded to get into my car as quickly as possible, lock the doors, and drive off. I guess the moral of the story is, trust your gut, because I'm one of those people who wants to help everyone. The thing is, I don't take risks when my kid is involved, and I honestly don't think she had good intentions. It was a nice day. She didn't need to be so pushy to get a ride. So this happened one morning at around 6 a.m. I feel the need to share it. I was leaving for work one morning. I had to be there early, so it was pitch black outside, and there's not a lot of lighting on my street, so you really can't see anything without headlights or a flashlight of some kind. So I get in my car and drive to the end of my street and come up to a stop sign. Just then, I noticed there was a woman standing on the other side of the street. She was just standing there. So at this point, I'm probably at that stop sign for a couple of seconds, because now I'm a little concerned that there's a woman just standing on the side of the street in total darkness. Weird, right? And at this point she notices me. This is where it gets scary. She turns to look at me and out of nowhere just starts sprinting full speed to my car. And this isn't even like normal running we're on about. Her arms are out at her sides. The only way I can really describe it is how a zombie would run in a video game. She's running pretty fast. All I know is she definitely was coming at me. She looked like she wanted to hurt me. I went into full panic mode. I hit the gas pedal so hard. I must have been going like 60 in a residential area. I didn't care. Once I got a little distance away, I looked in my rearview mirror and I could still barely see her chasing after my car. And that's the end of the story. She was going fast, but of course she couldn't catch up with my car and I got away. But man, what a terrifying way to start a day. I have no idea who this lady was or what her intentions were. All I know is that I was afraid. I'm a female, and a few years ago I used to work at a job where I wouldn't usually get off until around 11 p.m. I didn't mind it for the most part. I am a night owl by nature, but I read a lot of Let's Not Meet and watch a lot of horror movies. I wouldn't say I'm paranoid, but I'm definitely cautious. This one particular night, I was driving home along one of the main roads. It was late enough that traffic was fairly scarce, but not so late that I felt like I was the only one out, especially because there'd been a Jeep behind me for a good while at that point. When it came time for me to make my first turn, the Jeep followed. This wasn't really unusual. I was still on a big road, so I didn't think anything of it. I needed to get gas, and luckily there was a fairly busy and well-lit station on my way home. So from the road I was on, you had to turn left onto a side street, then turn right onto a street that runs parallel with a grocery store, and then turn right again to get into the gas station. It's a very specific destination, and there's no through traffic. When I went to make the first left, the Jeep got in the turn lane with me. This is when I started paying attention. They had already been behind me for a good 10 to 15 minutes, and it seemed unlikely that they were just coincidentally going to the same gas station as me, considering how many were in the area. But, like I said, there's also a grocery store that's open 24 hours, so I thought maybe they were just going to go there. However, they still followed me when I turned into the gas station. I pulled up to one of the pumps in the middle lane, put my car in park, and watched the Jeep in my rear view. There was no way in hell I was getting out of my car until I figured out what they were doing. If they pulled up to a pump and started getting gas, I'd laugh at myself and carry on. They didn't pull into a pump. They lurked at the back of the lot, just idling in place for close to a minute. Finally, they started slowly driving around the far end of the pumps until they stopped again in front of my car, roughly about 15 feet away. Unfortunately, they had tinted windows, so I couldn't see who was in the car or what they were doing. But after another brief period of time, they just drove off. I got gas and drove home. I kept an eye out, but I didn't see them again. I was driving through my neighborhood, and there's another street that intersects mine. There's a stop sign on the other street, but not mine. I was coming up to the intersection. I will admit I was going a bit fast for my neighborhood, but I wasn't doing anything crazy. I see a car to my right on the other street at the stop sign. I believe I sped up a bit. I figured they'd wait considering they were turning left onto the street I was on, and there was a car parked in that lane. So they turned left while simultaneously coming into my lane to avoid the car that was parked in the opposite lane. I slammed my brakes, nearly hitting the car that suddenly pulled into my lane diagonally. I didn't even honk. I just squeezed my car through, which was very difficult due to the parked car in the other lane, and this bozo who was halfway over onto my lane. I know I should have stopped and waited for them to go, but they had a stop sign and turned left anyway. And after making my turn, they also felt the need to immediately go around the parked car that was now in their lane. I believe this was a guy that lives down the street from me. I think I recognized the car, but after the near collision, I just drove home. I'll add that I could basically see my house from where this happened. I glanced at my rear view and saw him pulling into a driveway, and they started backing up and turned around, now following me down this part of my street that just goes to a dead end. I know most of my close neighbors' cars, so I don't think it was anyone who lives right next to me. I pulled into my driveway, not really thinking they were following at first, but when I got to the top, I saw their lights in my rear view again. When I got out of the car, they backed out of my driveway, honked at me once, and drove back the way they came. I don't know what this person's intentions were with following me to my house, but I'm glad they had calmed down, or whatever. When I was pregnant with my first child, who was born in 2013, I joined an online birth club community for moms who were due the same month. Eventually, this led to a smaller Facebook group, which allowed for more personal conversations. As you can imagine, being in a group of people whose only common connection is when your kid is born can lead to coming across some interesting characters you would probably never interact with otherwise. Anyway, over time, bonds were formed and moms shared a lot of their daily life, whether it was about the kids or otherwise. Among this group was Leslie Filataro. Almost a year after our February 2013 babies were born, she announced another pregnancy and that she was due in June 2014. Of course, everyone congratulated her and were looking forward to new updates. Leslie mostly posted about her everyday life with her twins, annoyances living with her sister-in-law, feeling stuck, and how she and her family were really struggling for money and couldn't wait to be able to move into their own place. These posts about their financial issues got more and more detailed and frequent, and then some people sent baby supplies to try to help out a struggling mom. With her due date approaching about 4 weeks away, another mom posted and tagged her to check on her. She asked how everything was going since she had seemed to completely stop posting and commenting in the group. Someone got the idea to Google her name, and that's when the news story popped up that about 3 weeks prior to this post check on her, Leslie was arrested for her connection to her boyfriend's attempted murder on a woman in their town. This sent the entire group down a rabbit hole of Facebook investigation and piecing together the story until all the details came out and her trial started. Leslie's side is that she was dropping her boyfriend Chad Horn off to a friend's house, and she was waiting in a nearby park to pick him up when he was done there, that she had no knowledge of what he was there to do. She had her twin 1-year-old daughters and nephew in the car with her, and she was obviously 9 months pregnant at the time. The real story is that she was his getaway driver. He was hired as a hitman to kill the woman he was dropped off to. She purchased supplies that Chad took with him to use in the attack, which were ultimately what led her to a guilty verdict in being complicit with the crimes. Chad forced his way into the home at gunpoint while this woman and her 2 children were home. He made her go out and start her vehicle while he stayed inside with her kids, and when she came back, he bound her hands with zip ties, slit her throat, and fired 1 shot at her, which missed, and then he fled the home in this woman's car. The woman survived all of this and was able to get to her neighbor's house for help. Chad called 911 twice to report 2 made-up shootings at different locations to lead them away. There was a police chase with them, and he ended up shooting and killing himself. There was a suspect who may have hired Chad for a hit out on this woman, but no evidence has been found on him, even after 70 search warrants had been issued. After much Facebook stalking from the group at the time of this trial, we suspected that it may have been the woman's ex-husband. It's just speculation though, as none of it's been confirmed. The victim was married to a woman at the time of this hit, and I'm assuming her children are from her previous marriage. Again, it's all speculation, but it seems the likely answer for me. There was a lot of doubt surrounding Leslie's trial. Some jurors that gave a guilty verdict came out and said they regretted it later, and they wished they could change it, that she shouldn't be held accountable for Chad's crimes and intentions. I personally believe without a doubt that Leslie knew what Chad had intended to do. I think their sole motive was money, due to all of her posts with the group about their financial struggles, and that she was growing more and more desperate to get out of her sister's house because they were not happy there. Whether or not she knew the details of this family, or would have agreed to help knowing this woman's young kids were also home, who knows, but I do believe she knew her role was to be the getaway driver for Chad. Leslie was found guilty in 2015 for her part in the attempted murder, burglary, and kidnapping. She was sentenced to 43 years in prison. When I was about 10, a really big storm went through the northeast corner of my state. It was about 4 p.m., and I was practicing with the community children's choir. an after-school program that I actually really enjoyed. We were practicing for a performance tour to all the nursing homes in the town. I sung in the soprano section, and we were receiving some criticism from our director when someone's mom showed up 30 minutes early to pick them up. Then another mom showed up, and then someone's grandpa, and another kid's dad. One by one, everyone left early, and then my mom showed up. She seemed really worried and told me to hurry up and get in the car, so I grabbed my backpack and we went out the door. When we walked outside, everything was dark. It was like the sun went down at 4:30 p.m. after spring forward. That just doesn't happen. Apparently it stormed so badly in the hour I was at choir practice that parts of our town had flooded. There was hail so big it busted car windows and damaged homes. The ride home was pretty scary for me at that age. I had no idea why I was picked up early. When we turned onto my street, it was flooded. The neighbors were rowing a canoe from one end to the other, and the older kids were trying to ride their bikes through the muddy water. We pulled into my driveway, and I immediately went inside and put my backpack in my room. My dad was in my room, cleaning up glass from the floor and my bed. There was water all over the floor, and my bed was soaked on one side. He said the hail busted my bedroom window, and the rain poured into my room, and the hail melted on the floor and on my bed. My dad wasn't able to replace the window that evening, so he got a plastic tarp, the kind you use to cover furniture when you're painting. It was folded into 4 layers and attached to my window with a staple gun. We had a movie night and just spent time together as a family that night. It made me feel better about sleeping in my room, but I still wanted a light on. It took me a while to fall asleep, but I read a chapter of Little House on the Prairie. That helped me fall asleep. That night I had a dream. At least I thought it was a dream. I heard a weird shuffling sound outside my window, kind of like the sound of a window opening and closing a few times. I realized I wasn't dreaming, but I couldn't move. My eyes were wide open, but it was like I was still asleep. I tried moving my legs, raising my arms, even tried rolling off the bed, but my whole body was stuck. Finally, I just used my voice. I mustered enough strength to scream as loud as I could and managed to turn my head toward the window. All I saw were 2 hands with white gloves holding the wood frame of the window, then moving it up and down and trying to jimmy it open. When I screamed a second time, he was gone. I jumped out of my bed and started to run to my parents' bedroom, but my legs felt like bricks and it felt like it took forever to get there. When I was outside their door, I just screamed at my mom. Someone was at my window. Fear and panic overwhelmed me as tears started dripping down my cheeks. My dad went outside to investigate and didn't see anyone. I never knew why they didn't call the police right then. I ended up sleeping in my mom's bed with her, and my dad slept on the couch very close to my bedroom. The next morning, my dad walked around the house, and there were large muddy footprints from the street to my window and back again. The screen to my window was ripped off and tossed into the neighbor's yard. The plastic on my window had a large hole the size of the man's finger, right above the window lock. My parents did finally call the police. An officer came to my school to get my statement, and I just told him what I saw that night. I slept in the living room for months after that. It's a Tuesday night at Office Depot where I work. A customer comes in needing to fax some things at 7 p.m. He said he remembered me from the last time he was there to fax, and I said, "Probably. I don't remember you, but I'm bad with remembering faces." Whatever. Skip to about 5 to 10 minutes later when his confirmation page finally comes in. I'm ringing him up, and without any context, he asks me, "Do you know how to get rid of a dead body?" I replied nervously, "No." "Well, I do watch a lot of TV, so..." He interrupts me with, "This is how you get rid of a body. You deep freeze the body, you get a wood chipper, you back it up into a river or lake, and you chip away at the body, and then the little fishies eat the body away. Then you take your wood chipper to a car wash and wash it out. He's not laughing or cracking a smile. He just tells me this very calmly and with a practical tone, as if he's giving me instructions on how to change a light bulb. It may not seem like a big deal. I'm totally into true crime and reading up on serial killings. But this was not reading an article. This was a man with a blank stare, giving me instructions on how to effectively get rid of a dead body with no context whatsoever. I'm a female, and this happened to me when I was about 17. I worked at a convenience store in my hometown. Back then, we did solo overnight shifts. It's not as common in the big chains anymore for safety reasons. I was working alone when a young man came into the store. He was about 19 to 20. I went to the counter to wait on him, and I realized he had his pants unzipped, and he was exposed. I was internally shocked, but I thought it was probably a prank, and he was trying to get a reaction out of me. I decided I wasn't going to give him the satisfaction, so I waited on him like a regular customer. It was the weirdest interaction. He walked around the store, exposed mind you, looking at all the items, walked up to the counter to buy something, paid for it. I gave him his change, and he left all the while letting his twig and berries get some air. I thought, well, he was probably disappointed about how that went, and then I went back to my work. The next day I found out the cops had arrested him because he'd come back later and was hanging out by the dumpster at the same convenience store, exposing himself to customers as they went into the store, telling them to come here. The cops came and arrested him. It creeped me out a bit because honestly, at the time I thought he was just some kid with friends outside, just trying to get some sort of reaction out of me, when in reality, he was a full-on creeper. I'm kinda glad I didn't react. It probably even confused him. I ended up quitting overnight solo shifts because my mom had a nightmare that I got stabbed in the back cooler while I was working alone. A few weeks after that dream, the guy that replaced me was held up at knife point. Well, there you go. That's my story. One summer night, my roommate and I were both sitting on the couch of our living room, talking and watching Supernatural. Two ladies in our late 20s. We felt safe with just the unlocked screen door closed a few feet from us as I sat facing the window to our backyard. Now, I will say this, we weren't completely naive. We had the porch backlight on and lived in a townhouse facing a ravine, so for anyone to get back here, they would have to walk past either 10 houses on the left side or 5 other houses on the right. It wasn't the safest area around, as it housed mostly students from our nearby university. But hey, we knew all the drug dealers by name. They were our buddies. This is also why my roommate didn't freak out right away when I began yelling. She thought I was joking with a drunk friend. So, the stage is set. Now to the creepy part. I was sitting facing the window, and my roommate faced me, so her back was to it. I was the only person to have actually seen him. At first I thought my mind was playing tricks on me. Just at the edges of the window, I could see the smiling face of a middle-aged man. But before I could register what I was seeing, the face backed up out of view. Not wanting to freak out my roommate, in case it was nothing, I went silent and got up to look out the back door that was to the left of the window. And there I saw an image that has been burned into my brain to this day, 5 years later. An obese man, wearing nothing but a black flat cap, was walking up the 2 steps of my porch toward my unlocked screen door. I yelled at the top of my lungs something like, "Get the hell out of here, I'm calling the cops." The part that has stuck with me is the fact that he just held his hands up in an appeasing gesture and kind of silently chuckled as he backed up. A big grin on his face the whole time, like it was all just some funny misunderstanding that he was naked in my backyard, about to come into my house. My roommate never saw him, which I'm glad for, but she was mad I didn't tell her what I suspected was going on at the time. We called the cops and 3 officers showed up. They searched the area but found no one. The part that still freaks me out is how long he was standing out there listening to us. I don't really know if he would have tried to open the door, but the fact he could have terrified me. I rationalize it now, thinking he just wanted a reaction, and I'm glad I gave him an angry one instead of a scared one. So I'm doing an outreach in a neighboring town. I see patients till around 4 p.m. and then I go to the guest house I normally stay over in. I'm tired as hell, so I check in, go to my room, throw my luggage in the corner, put my phone on the bedside table, get undressed, and I jump in bed. I'm almost asleep when I hear something next to me. I open my eyes, and there's this old lady standing next to my bed with my phone in her hand. Well dressed, deathly thin with these penetrating grayish blue eyes. She's calmly pressing and scrolling and turning my phone every which way like it's something she's never seen before. I'm disorientated more than panicked. I speak as gently as I can. "Ma'am, may I help you, ma'am?" She stops fiddling, slowly looks up to the wall, and turns her gaze towards me. She doesn't even register that I'm naked. "How long have I been here?" she said. "I don't know, ma'am. This is my room." She looked confused suddenly, looked at my phone, and gently set it back on the bedside table. Then she turned to me again and smiled in this sad, out-of-worldly manner. "I don't belong here, do I?" she said. I smiled back. "That's okay, ma'am." She turned around and calmly walked out the door. Turns out she had Alzheimer's disease, and she wandered off while her husband was checking in. I forgot to lock my door when I came in. Her husband apologized profusely for the incident. I just told him there was nothing to apologize for, but it was still creepy though. After getting my driving license, I was hanging out with my friends in Rome. There were 5 of us, me and 4 passengers. It was around midnight when we hopped off in a square in the south of the city with a football to play with. It was during summer vacations, so it was a normal thing for us to do. After some time, a guy in his early 30s came up to us with a big travel bag. He wasn't creepy, but he was strange. He was skinny but very toned and athletic. He wore shorts, very used sneakers, a long-sleeve shirt. He had a beard and greasy long hair and a baseball cap. It was not a common look for a 30-year-old Italian man. He started chatting and then asked if he could join us. After some minutes playing, he started to ask about our interests and then about our sex life. I'm a shy guy, but some of my friends aren't, so they started going along with him, and he started to show us, without reason, finger push-ups, one-leg squats, and some other cool exercises. One of my friends was fooling around with him and treating him like he was stupid, always asking for more exercises. Bear in mind, before he started playing with us, he had hid the big bag he had between 2 parked cars. The friend of mine who was messing around with him sent the ball a bit farther from us. He asked the guy to get the ball for us. Meanwhile, my friend asked me to unlock my car. He went to grab this man's bag and throw it in the back of my car, and then told me and my friends to get in the car and hurry, to leave this guy with our ball and we'll take his bag. In a few seconds we rushed to the car and he started chasing us. After driving some distance, he disappeared from my rearview mirror. I can say he ran pretty fast. I'm no thief, but as a teen we do stupid things. I really didn't want to do something like this to a random guy. We parked near our houses and my friend started opening the bag, and here's where things started to get creepy. What we found were dirty clothes, a knife that looked to be some kind of dagger, some food, and a small box with a 3-digit lock. We were really curious about it, so we smashed it on the floor, trying to open it. After we threw it on the ground a few times, the box revealed 16 female IDs, all different. I started to worry about my safety, since we used my car and he could remember my license plate and maybe find me in some way. We also wondered who the man could be and why he carried these things. We went to my friend's house, switched cars, and went back with my friend to the place where we met the guy, just to check. We arrived and all lowered ourselves to hide, making it look like there was only one person in the car. When we got there, more than 1 hour later, he was still there, sitting on the car who was parked in front of mine before. He didn't notice us, and we went back home with a lot more doubts about him. After 10 years, I still remember this guy. The day after, one of us went to the police with the bag, saying we found it on the road. We left the daggers and IDs inside. My friend made an official report, lying but surely doing a good thing. A little over a year ago, I was approached via Twitter by a girl claiming she wanted to work together. Her location was not only the same city as mine, but in the same community as well. After a brief conversation in the DMs, I realized this profile was strange. It was fake. Immediately I block her and keep it moving. After this, it just gets so strange. This person continues to make fake profiles, pretending to know me, and eventually went into fake phone numbers to text me. I never once gave them my number. It's weird enough this person is persistent in stalking and harassing me. I'm a freelance entrepreneur, and a great portion of my income comes from online. So if it was up to me, I'd just unplug. But I can't let this harm my career. But this person has gone onto my friends' numbers and profiles, trying to contact them. I have no idea how. I'm very discreet. I don't interact with these friends online. And somehow this person is finding them one by one over the past year and persistently harassing them, even making fake Facebook profiles to harass certain people I deal with. It was not only my friends in the same area and group, but friends I have from other cities. When I tell you, and this is not an exaggeration, I have blocked over 100 Instagram accounts, Twitter profiles, texting app numbers, and emails from this person. And keep in mind, you need to make a new email to make an Instagram account. I'm a single man. Of course I have lady friends, but none of them are under the impression it's anything different. I also have no bad blood with any ex or former fling. I'm on good terms with everyone, as far as I know at least. But someone is targeting me, and any person they think I date or talk to romantically. It has affected relationships with people I deal with. Either someone I know, I have no idea how close, but they are close enough, secretly hates me and wants to make my life hell. Or a stranger is obsessed with me and wants to run everyone around me away. I have prayed on this, just talking to God to reveal who this is to me, or just make it go away. After a year, this persistence is starting to wear me down. I have no idea who this is. I have reported it to the police, but they haven't done much. I even tried to hire a digital private investigator, but the few I've contacted said they can't help me. It's just sick. Something has to give. This happened to me about a week ago. I found a summer job at our local supermarket and was about 2 weeks in. I got asked to work the late night shift, 11 till 5 a.m. roughly. I accepted since I was in need of money and I never sleep early. Everything was fine and dandy until about 3 a.m. when a shirtless, scarred up guy came into the store. After lingering around the store for a while, he quickly came up to the counter, making intense eye contact with me. As I was about to ask him if he needed any help, he whispered, "Don't you dare move." I didn't hear him at first, so I asked him if he could repeat that. At that point he got agitated and yelled, "Make another sound, and I'll cut you up." In a swift motion, he vaulted over the counter to the alcohol section, trying to grab a bottle of whiskey. Thankfully, the owners hid a bat under the counter. The moment he turned his back to me, I took the bat and swung full force at his knee. He winced in pain and tried to get up. I winded my bat again, acting like I was going to hit him again, just to see him pull out a homemade shiv of some sort. I let him get up, and the moment he got up, he swung his shiv at me, lightly lacerating my wrist. I pushed him back with my bat and ran for the door and got out. The day after, I called the cops and showed them the security camera footage, but they haven't contacted me since. I think it's safe to say I won't be working the late night shift again for a long time. Hey guys, I hope you enjoyed that one. If you have a story you'd like me to feature on the channel, you can send it to my email, or if you have a Reddit, submit it on my subreddit. You'll find the details in the video description below. I'll pin a comment too. Do me a favor and leave a like and comment. Subscribe if you haven't, and hit the bell icon and turn on notifications so you can stay up to date with my latest videos. If you fancy checking out my Patreon channel membership, all my links are in the description below. And as usual, I want to thank my patrons and channel members for supporting the channel. So a huge thanks to Austin, Tegan, Chris and Donna, Cassie Fowler, Pretty Girl 215, Christy, B Nick, Lil Smart, Do It, K, Something Edgy, Pretty Girl 215, Borderline Betty, Sarah C, Blazed Goddess, Christopher, Spider's Web, Ooh La La Andrea, Lady Drackard, Sue, Absinthe Alice, Rochelle, Astara Ray, Monique, Crafty Kel, Monica Levelace, Emma, Sean Gorman, Jennifer L, Skittles MM, Gabrielle, Seraphina Nightingale, Jennifer C, Misanthropia, Fluby, Ryan, Brenda, Rudy, Christina De La Rosa, Noosh, Lulu Rogers, Fire05, Linda, Shan, Jody, Sarah P, Kathleen Fenton, James Gargano, Gemma Allen, Alex, and Courtney Maxwell. I hope you guys enjoyed that and are doing well. I'll see you in the next one.